August 22nd, 2024 is here. 2 weeks from tonight, the NFL season will begin and drafts are going fast and furious. We're here to help you to try to make sure that you are maximizing all your drafts output and hopefully taking home a few big time grand prizes this year with the FFPC. Hi, hello, and welcome to the FFPC High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network. I am your host, Eric Balkman. You follow me on the X, or even if you don't, I'm cool with that too. At Eric Balkman. You know me from the HSFF Hour, the RotoViz High Stakes Slowdown, and of course the Fantasy Football Players Championship. Being joined tonight by one of the savants over at 4for4.com. 4for4 Fantasy Football's own Connor Allen, NFL on the X. It is Connor Allen. Connor, welcome aboard, man.
Eric, I appreciate you having me on. You're an absolute legend in the high stakes and FFPC streets. I swear, I think I've seen your name for a long time, and I've always been, I think this is our first show together ever. So excited to chop it up and talk some fantasy football, high stakes, a little bit each.
Yeah, no, it's going to be fun. And I think one of the great things about this show, not only do we have a really great crew that watches every week, but I think the ideas that you bounce off of me, the ideas that listeners bounce off of me, and we can get out of our own echo chamber. It makes us better fantasy players. So really everybody wins. As Michael Scott from The Office would say, it is a win-win-win when you watch the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on BSN. The 2024 Fantasy Pros Championship has drafts filling every day. This is the last week for 6-hour slow drafts. So if you want to get in on a 6-hour slow, make sure you're registering now at myffpc.com. As a reminder, it is a $1 million grand prize, a $6 million plus prize pool. These drafts are filling up fast. We have drafts going on all the way up until 1 a.m. Eastern time tonight. $350 gets you in, and you'll get a $50 discount every time for every third team that you sign up with as well. MyFFPC.com is where to go for that. For the main event, which also has $1 million grand prize, that also has live and slow drafts filling every day. MyFFPC.com is where to head to win that $1 million. And plus, we have 2 separate best ball tournaments going on. A $125 entry fee into our best ball tournament. That is a $300,000 grand prize. A $35 entry fee to get into our $100,000 grand prize Superflex Best Ball Tournament. And don't forget about Empire and Dynasty startups going on over at myffpc.com. The Empire Leagues are new this year. A lot of people have been very excited about them. They've been filling fast, as with all their drafts this time of year. One of the things we're most excited about this time of year, you're not waiting around for leagues to fill. You're just drafting. myffpc.com, or scan the QR code on your screen right here that our producer Sean Engel has posted on the screen. Shout out to Sean for producing the show tonight. Let's get into it. Connor Allen. Jonathan Gannon, who is the head coach of the Arizona Cardinals, has said that Kyler Murray is leaps and bounds ahead of where he was during the 2023 season. He tore his ACL, did Murray, not Gannon, in 2022 in week 10, and then 10 touchdowns and 5 interceptions over 8 games. It was one of the lowest adjusted yards per attempt of his NFL career. Gannon was very effusive in his praise, talking about how much better and he looks in 2024 compared to 2023. And this is exciting, Connor, because Kyler Murray, a year removed from this ACL tear, he could be more mobile again. And one of the things I've noticed that I'm really doing a ton of this year is drafting mobile quarterbacks, drafting quarterbacks that can chew up yardage with their legs, get the occasional touchdown here or there. Kyler Murray, quarterback 7 right now at the end of the 7th round in the Fantasy Pros Championship. That is behind C.J. Stroud, Anthony Richardson. It's ahead of Burrow and Love. I think when push comes to shove, I think there's a case that Murray should be going ahead of Stroud. I don't know if he passes Richardson, but I'm loving me some Kyler Murray in the mid-7th.
Yeah, I think he's a great pick, especially for a couple of reasons that you already laid out. When Kyler Murray came back, and started playing last year, the Cardinals were 10th in points per game, 9th in EPA per play, 9th in total yards per game, 7th in points per drive. And that was before drafting Marvin Harrison Jr. And, now they have a healthy Greg Dortch, and still have Trey McBride. I think they have a full arsenal now of weapons. And on top of this, I think you're getting a bonus here because this defense is still really bad, really bad. They're going to be playing in a ton of shootouts. I think Kyler Murray is going to be forced to throw a bunch and run a bunch. He already mentioned that early in the offseason, he couldn't really, I don't know what the word that he used was, but it was he couldn't really accelerate. He couldn't run around as much as he thought he wanted to last year. This year, I think that's going to be way different. So I think for fantasy purposes, I don't know if the Cardinals are going to be good in real life, but for fantasy purposes, which is what we care about, I think Kyler Murray is going to be a fantastic fantasy football quarterback with high floor because of his rushing upside, and then just a massive ceiling if the Cardinals are putting up, 25 to 30 points a game, which I think is very much in the range of outcomes here this season.
I put this rundown together last night, and one of the things you always risk when you put down a rundown together that early is breaking news. And I should have let off with breaking news, but I will do it right now because we had a trade in the NFL that affects fantasy, and it was an interdivisional trade between the Eagles and the Commanders. Kind of wild stuff here. Jahan Dotson and a 5th rounder go to the Eagles in exchange for a 2025 third and 2 7th-round picks. Dotson, according to reports, has been outplayed by both De'Ami Brown and Olamide Zaccheaus in camp so far this year. And I would think that De'Ami Brown is probably your starter opposite Terry McLaurin in this offense, while Zaccheaus could be in the slot. Now, the Eagles did not have much depth behind. I mean, it's like Johnny Wilson, guys like that. We're competing to be Paris Campbell, for God's sake. Paris Campbell in 2024 is still relevant. Unbelievable. But now they get I want to say bona fide, but a guy that maybe has the highest upside of any of those players. And Dotson is a guy that comes in, I don't want to say a better situation because he's not going to be a top 2 receiver there, but the way he was trending in Washington, maybe he wasn't going to be a top 2 receiver there anyway. Let's tackle this from the Eagles side first, okay? Does Dotson's value change at all for you? To me, it's kind of stagnant from him going Washington to Philadelphia right now. Are you handling Jahan Dotson any differently post-trade, Connor, right now?
Not really. I think ideally, again, it's going to take him a couple weeks to get ramped up. I mean, we're a week, 2 weeks out from the season here, like 15 days essentially. So him coming in and having like a massive role in week 1, I don't think that's really going to happen here. But I do think that we've already heard that Devonta Smith is going to be playing more in the slot. So I think that could push Jahan Dotson outside, where he was actually averaging more, targets per out run and yards per out run on the outside. So like if we push Jahan Dotson outside, AJ Brown outside, and then Devonta Smith kind of in the slot, I don't know. I mean, is he going to be consistent? Is he a guy I'm targeting? I don't really think so. I guess in the case, like the upside case is like maybe one of Devonta or AJ Brown gets injured and then he's the number 2 on a way more efficient offense. I think that's the bull case for a guy like Jahan Dotson at this point. His profile was solid coming out of college. He just never really put it all together. There's some rumors coming out of Washington about character issues, him not blocking well. We don't know what the case is. Either way, it didn't work out. I think this is a fresh start. So he's probably not a target for mine in his current ADP, but I do think that maybe there's some more upside based on how things were trending. Like you mentioned, like he was routinely being outplayed by even a guy like Luke McCaffrey. I think was going to play a little bit more than him or outproduce him. So he's kind of a guy that I'm targeting like way later on the Washington side. But we can touch on that now if you want.
I will get to Washington in a second. Just the last thing I want to say about Philly. Devonta Smith, if he is playing in the slot more, does that get you more excited if you're playing in a full PPR league like the FFPC? Right now, Devonta Smith, wide receiver 20 at the 403. After the trade, we'll see what happens here and how far he goes up or down. But how far up should he go if he's going to be playing a little bit more slot this year?
Yeah, I think that he has also been better actually out of the slot. So it's like 2 moves here where moving Dotson outside and then Devonta in the slot are both better for them historically based on their numbers. So yeah, I'm really excited about him this season. Also, when you've added in the Kellen Moore factor, way more motion, one of the highest motion rates in the league over the last few years during his tenure, coming from the Eagles, who were one of the lowest in motion rates last year. And then also pace of play. They're going to be playing much faster with their new offensive coordinator. So I think that all of those factors combined with Devonta Smith in the slot, you're going to see way more volume, which again, like you mentioned, matters a ton in FFPC leagues. I think getting him into 3-4 turns is fantastic. I've even seen him into main events going like mid-4th, which I think is a massive steal. And at that point, he's like an auto selection for me there.
In our Fantasy Pros Championship, basically our mid-stakes version of the FFPC main event, 403 is his ADP right now. So yeah, I'm definitely on board with that, and I'll have to start taking a look because I think he's going to rise up, higher than that, obviously. But 403 I'm with you on that. Okay, Washington. Let's talk about the fun side here. So this is a team that I've been excited about pretty much since they took Jaden Daniels in the draft. I'm a big fan of Daniels this year for fantasy. I think he's a guy that's not going high enough in drafts as far as the season. I think he's going to have. I'm still of the opinion that Austin Eckler. It's difficult for me to say oh, this guy that was playing through all these injuries last year, who was a top 5 overall choice. Yeah, I wouldn't take him in the 10th round this year. I can't really sell myself on that. It's just too big of a plunge. So I like him at that spot there. Obviously, McLaurin could be the biggest beneficiary because Jaden Daniels is the exact type of quarterback you want throwing to a player of McLaurin's skill set. But now, and I say the fun part here is like, well, now who else is gonna catch passes? I was of the opinion that it's probably gonna be Dotson, but now Olamide Zaccheaus. You mentioned Luke McCaffrey, who FFPC dynasty players were falling all over themselves to draft in rookie drafts this year. Zaccheaus, De'Ami Brown, who is probably the leading contender to start opposite McLaurin. And then you think about those tight ends that they have there in Ertz and Sinnott too. I don't, Ertz is just kind of is what he is at this point, but Sinnott is going to be an interesting guy for the second half of the season. There is a lot of ways to go with Washington now. How do you handle it? Who are, besides McLaurin and Eckler, who are the guys that we need to be looking at to draft on our teams this year? It sounded like McCaffrey's one for you, Connor.
Yeah, like real late. I mean, you could.
And all these guys are going really late. That's the thing. I mean, Brown's late, McCaffrey's late, Zaccheaus, I don't even think is being chosen. So, like, you can get these guys really cheap. I guess it kind of depends as this news washes over the FFPC players. How high is McCaffrey and De'Ami Brown going to go up?
Yeah, I was doing a best ball draft today. I think that I took him like the 15th round or something like that, which is what I mean, 50 spots higher than his ADP was. But I just wanted some exposure, to these guys here because we have Cliff Kingsbury coming over as offensive coordinator, and even in preseason, we've seen an outrageous rate of no huddle and an outrageous rate of like the time to throw is like one of the fastest in the league. They're getting the ball out quick, using a bunch of screens. Is that how we unlock Jaden Daniels? I don't know. Maybe it's good to get him in rhythm. Maybe it's good to get the ball out. I'm not sure that these are the explosive playmaker, yak playmakers that you want to get the ball in outside of Terry McLaurin. But like for a fantasy purpose, remember a catch is a point for FFPC league. So, I think McLaurin could see, 7, 8, 9 targets a game pretty easily. I think some of these ancillary guys could see a bunch of targets. Zach Ertz is going to go like 5 for 30 and maybe a touchdown basically every game, at this rate. So it's one of those things that I think all of these, that there's a lot of value here because it's a lot of these bad teams. We'll get into some other ones or, perceived bad teams. Their offensive value is depressed. But when you think about it from a fantasy lens, I mean, there's still plenty of value here. These guys are going to score points, maybe not a ton of touchdowns, but plenty of points, I think.
Yeah, and I think the linchpin is Daniels, right? And I think as long as he's healthy, and that's what I wanted to talk about next here. Was officially named this week by Dan Quinn as the starting quarterback in news that should not surprise anybody. But when you look at a player like him who is being drafted right now, and I'll bring up the fantasy mojo on him as far as where he's going. But right now, Jaden Daniels among quarterbacks, and I'll just focus in on that position here when we talk about, who we want to pick at that spot. Quarterback 11 at the 9-10. He's going behind Murray, who we both like, Burrow and Love and Prescott. I think there's a case to be made that Daniels should be going ahead of Prescott. He should be going ahead of Burrow, maybe even Love too, given his mobility. I love him this year. He's going to be on a lot of my teams. However, if there is there's two things that concern me. Number one, he's a rookie. Anything is possible. What can happen? We've never seen him do it before, right? So there is a bit of a leap of faith there, which I can get over with. But he's kind of a slight guy. He's not a big guy, which is fine if you're just strictly a pocket passer. But Jaden Daniels is not strictly a pocket passer. One of the reasons I like him so much is his ability to get out and run the football, but that exposes him to big hits. And we saw that with Richardson last year. Anthony Richardson knocked him out for the season. So I'm excited about Daniels, but I'm going to have to get a more proven veteran just in case he misses any time. How have you been handling Jaden Daniels in your FFPC leagues, Connor?
Yeah, I like him a lot as a target, especially if I don't, he's not a guy that you necessarily need to stack him with McLaurin. I think that you can get him and just draft him and not really get all his pass catchers late if you want to target any of those guys. But like you can come away with, get him in the later rounds and still feel good about, oh, maybe I can stack him with one of his later guys. If they break out, great. If not, I have a great mobile quarterback who can run. And if the offense pans out, I mean, he's, top 5 quarterback upside as a rookie very easily. And so I will say the one clips that were interesting to me was there was a clip of Jaden Daniels running in a preseason game. And as soon as he got up, Dan Quinn is yelling at him, like, why didn't you slide earlier? All that stuff. So he's very clearly emphasized that, which is a good thing. He's very clearly emphasized that. That was one of the most notable things on tape that I was worried about with him coming out of LSU was like, there was a clip, maybe it was against FSU in the first quarter, 1st and 10. He runs like a draw and then tries to like jump over 3 guys and gets like spun around in the air. And I was like, oh boy, these guys are, not NFL players. Like if he's getting hit by NFL players in this situation, this is going to be a pretty short season for the guy. Now it seems like Dan Quinn has put an emphasis on that not happening. So hopefully Jaden Daniels can stay healthy, because if he can, I mean, he's going to be like a very consistent QB1 with massive week-to-week upside, which is exactly what you want, like the mid to later rounds.
I mean, you don't have to tell me names, or you can tell me names if you want. If you draft Daniels, who's the type of quarterback that you like to pair him with? Is it like somebody like Purdy or Goff, or would you go really crazy and do Daniels, Caleb Williams? I mean, what if you have Daniels on your team, who's the other quarterback that you want to get?
Yeah, I like Caleb Williams a lot. I think that.
But would you pair both the rookies together as your top 2 quarterbacks on a team?
Yeah, my risk tolerance is pretty high, so yes.
I love it. Yeah, this is great.
I mean, I don't know. I kind of view these tournaments like from a macro perspective as like you just need to get to the championship rounds and have as much upside as possible, and then pray that your bullets end up firing and end up hitting. So that's always my goal: get to the championship rounds and then have as much upside as possible. I think both Daniels and Caleb Williams, if they pan out, have insane amounts of upside. Now, I also think playing the waiver wire is fine. Like, from a QB perspective, you can figure out if both these guys stink, you're just gonna have to be streaming QBs all the rest of the year and figure it out from there.
Now, Connor, are you in Chicago or the Chicagoland area?
I am. Yeah.
Okay.
I live in the city.
Now, are you a Bears fan living in the city of Chicago?
So I grew up in Colorado. So I have a Demaryius Thomas jersey behind me over here. But my as working in the industry, my fandom has worn down a little bit. With betting and fantasy and everything like that. So I would say that I'm a slight Broncos fan at this point, but I have so many different leagues and bets out on a given Sunday that it became very challenging for me to get up like I used to for like a Broncos game. And I am very excited about the Bears though in general, because the city of Chicago is a better place when their sports teams are good. And right now their sports teams are absolutely dreadful outside of the Bears projected to be. So I'm hoping that he's good for the sake of the city.
Now, in regards to the Bears, a couple of things I want to talk about here. Number one, Caleb Williams and the majority of the starters are not playing tonight against the Chiefs. So this is a great reason to sit back and watch a little high stakes fantasy football show instead of preseason football. What is your opinion on Caleb Williams this year? I would assume that this is the type of player when you're trying to win a national contest, a national tournament, you want to have this guy in your team because of the unknown upside. And there clearly, Connor, has never, at least to my knowledge, been a rookie quarterback that has been set up for success with the weapons on the perimeter, the tight ends, the running back, and the offensive line that have been set up by Ryan Poles for Caleb Williams this year. I love Jaden Daniels, but man, it's getting tougher and tougher to say I'm going to take Daniels ahead of Caleb Williams because of the way everything's been set up there. What's been your take on Williams so far as training camp draws to a close here shortly?
Yeah, I would say that he has consistently flashed the upside of reason why people call him Patrick Mahomes. He's made plays that, not a lot of other quarterbacks can make. He is exciting. That being said, I think that they've struggled at times trying to execute the short game, lost in the highlights. That was the last preseason game. I think they had three and outs to start the game. It was because they were trying to implement more of a system and not like hey, Caleb, bail us out and do these crazy things every play. Because it's not generally a sustainable, offense on a play-to-play basis. So, I would say that there's still a lot of work to be done on consistently moving the chains and, on a play-to-play basis. I don't think it's going to look pretty right off the bat, but there's going to be the highs are really high. And if those things can consistently click on a play-to-play basis, I mean, there's no reason that he can't throw for 4,000 plus yards, which has never been done in the Bears' history of having a quarterback, which is crazy that that's even a case, but they've never had a 4,000 yard passer. And now you have DJ Moore. Now you have, Roma Dunze and Keenan Allen, who got a lot of bad publicity, where I'm kind of buying the dip. I think all three of these guys are very viable options at their current ADPs. They are a little bit pricier than, again, like we talked about Washington's options, they're a little bit pricier than that. But DJ Moore, coming off a massive season with Justin Fields, Roma Dunze would have been the wide receiver 1 or 2 in basically every other class. And then Keenan Allen, who's has, I think, 95 plus catches in 6 of his last 7 seasons, something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, just super consistent and doesn't need to be the wide receiver one. He can sit in the slot, beat some guys, sit open in zone, and kind of just be that, chain moving option that Caleb Williams needs. So I think all of them have a lot of week to week upside in this offense if it pans out to be anything, which I'm pretty confident that it will be something here. It's just a matter of how consistent it can be on a play-to-play basis.
Let's talk about the Bears receivers here for a second. Have you been watching Hard Knocks?
Yeah.
Okay, here's my concern because I've been watching it too. I feel like it's poisoning my mind, and for fantasy purposes.
Yeah.
Because up until the third episode, I was really down on Keenan. I mean, I know some people are talking about it. I'm surprised that more people are not talking about Keenan Allen apparently weighing 25 pounds heavier than he did when he came into the NFL. And the connection between Williams and Odunze looks unbelievable. And it's,
Yep.
I'm live in Northeast Wisconsin. I'm a season ticket holder for the Packers. So obviously this is not something I'm looking forward to at all. And then DJ Moore, I'm just getting the feeling like, okay, he is their number one. They paid him, they extended him when they didn't really have to. He is going in the mid fourth. It's weird. Odunze has almost caught Keenan Allen. They were a couple of rounds apart a couple of weeks ago. Now Odunze on average is only going 5 picks behind Keenan Allen. Your thoughts? Number one, do the FFPC drafters and me have it right that Moore is the number one receiver? And then number two, Keenan Allen with the weight gain, is that overblown? Is it something that we need to be talking about? And is this Odunze connection real? A lot to unpack there. I'll let you go with whatever way you want with the Chicago Bears wide receivers.
Yeah, I think that DJ Moore is the wide receiver one. I'm very comfortable taking him again in the 4th round. Like, he's another early to mid 4th round target. And if you get him in the late 4th round, which is sometimes possible, I've seen on some boards in the FFPC, I think that's an absolute steal. Again, I think that because it's a rookie quarterback, because maybe it's not going to be a super high volume passing offense right off the bat, like there's going to be some down weeks for one of these guys. I mean, it's just inevitable. There's only so much volume that can go around, volume and efficiency, unless the Bears are scoring 35 plus a game, which again, I mean, as a Packers fan, probably is giving you nightmares, but I don't think that's all that likely either. To be fair, I think it's just going to be a bumpy start, and we'll see how it smooths out. I think DJ Moore is a rock solid wide receiver one, though. And then what happens with wide receiver 2 and 3 from a fantasy perspective is going to be really interesting to watch. If Keenan Allen and Caleb Williams are connecting, and he's seeing 6, 7 targets a game, Keenan Allen will be consistent. If he's not, and Rome Odunze, he's stepping up, like you said, and he's the up and coming rookie that, again, is very, very, very talented. The word that I got before they drafted him was they think he's the next Mike Evans, essentially. That's how they viewed him. He's going to absolutely crush, especially in the money weeks. Again, we're not necessarily drafting from weeks 1 through 8. I mean, obviously you got to make the playoffs and hopefully make the championship rounds. That all matters. But where you're drafting these guys, which is, correct me if I'm wrong, 6th, 7th, 8th round, 9th round. Sometimes I've seen these guys go in FFPC leagues. I almost kind of want the upside of hey, that week 15 through 17, where the championship rounds where you can win $1 million. I want the guy who it has wide receiver one upside here, where I'm not sure if Keenan Allen really has that, because he was mostly a volume guy, at least the last couple of years. And I just don't know if he sees that volume. So I think they're all good options. I think that they all have some upside, but I'm targeting Odunze kind of later because I think that he's just the most fun upside guy and cost relative. He's the cheapest. So
he is the cheapest for sure. And whether he continues to be the cheapest, I have misgivings about that, because I think he is going to catch Allen. I think he's going to move ahead of him. The weight thing with Allen, you're kind of meh about.
Well, so he looked pretty bad on film in the preseason games, and Hard Knocks, I mean, looked fine. But then the last episode, he looked really good.
He looks really good. That third episode. Exactly.
They made a whole episode. It was they heard the Fat Keenan chants, and decided to make a whole segment on him. I don't know, maybe it was a confidence thing or they just wanted to make sure that he was good to go. But I think it's just so unknown. We just have no idea, who's going to come out on top. The only thing I'm most confident is that DJ Moore is a very, very good receiver and that Rome Odunze has late upside. The rest, it wouldn't surprise me if anything else panned out.
Moving on to Pittsburgh running back situation. We'll go from Chicago receivers to Pittsburgh running backs. Jaylen Warren, a darling for many high stakes players coming into this season, a player that I continue to, when I would have conversations with a lot of high stakes players, I would continue to hear that I like Warren better than Harris. I like Warren better than Harris over and over and over again, right? And yet, Harris's ADP was always ahead of Warren's, which I didn't understand. Now we find out that Mike Tomlin saying that the hamstring injury that Jaylen Warren suffered against the Bills is not a long-term concern. There's still plenty of reports out there saying that Warren is going to miss multiple weeks and only has a chance to suit up for week 1 against the Falcons. Now, given that the Pittsburgh Steelers have Najee Harris, there's not necessarily a huge reason to rush Jaylen Warren back. But this is a guy that had caught Harris and moved ahead of him in ADP. Now we look at it, and Harris has significantly moved ahead of Jaylen Warren. These guys were neck and neck pretty much all drafting season. Harris is at the 704, running back 23. Jaylen Warren has fallen to running back 30 at the 807. So almost a full round and a half apart. Should we be buying the dip on Jaylen Warren, knowing that this hamstring injury, as of right now, is only temporary and shouldn't affect him all season? Or is Harris the guy to target, knowing he's going to be the healthy one coming into week 1 against Atlanta?
I think it depends on how you construct your roster, right? Because, based on who you drafted before, if you need a guy in the first 3 weeks, I don't think you should be drafting Jaylen Warren. Like that's, or you need to have a contingency plan of like 3-4 targets you're getting after that. Maybe a Chuba Hubbard or someone like Jerome Ford. I don't know, someone that can like kind of be a stopgap for the first 3 weeks that you can start, because I just wouldn't anticipate Jaylen Warren being much of a factor early. Now, again, we're probably going to mention this a lot. You don't make your money in the first 3 weeks,
Right.
So like that's like, I think the upside is still there. Now, if you have the right build for it, or if you have the right plan, like I think that he's still a great pick. Obviously, the Steelers brought in Arthur Smith, one of the run heaviest, coach last year in the league. Beat the Steelers by I think 2% pass rate over expectation. So they were even more run heavy somehow. And so now he's working with the Steelers, who address the offensive line, have a mishmash of Russell Wilson or Justin Fields at quarterback. They're going to run the ball as much as possible. Their defense, they're going to play like, 1950s football, basically, is what I think we're going to see. And I think we need to adjust to that, because I think that both Warren and Najee can be very fantasy viable this season when both healthy. And I think the interesting part here is like, if either misses significant chunks of time, doesn't look like Warren's going to miss significant chunks of time. They're both like very, I would say RB2s plus, mid RB2s plus at the minimum.
Mm-hmm.
Like we'll probably RB1s, honestly, in most scenarios. If Jaylen Warren misses week 1, I think I wouldn't be surprised to see people ranking Najee Harris as like a fringe RB1 in some scenarios, because he's going to see 22 plus carries and, get all the goal line work. And probably, he can catch the ball too. It's not like he can't catch. He just doesn't, because Jaylen Warren's a better pass catcher, so I think both are actually great picks. And that's like a section of drafts where I love a lot of the running backs there. So I've been kind of building my roster of like, try and get 2 to 3 in that, 6th, 7th, 8th round range there of the Najee Harris's, DeAndre Swift's, Tony Pollard's, Raheem Mostert's, like all those guys I think are like somewhat viable targets kind of later in drafts this year that have gotten pushed down.
I think if there's an offensive coordinator that you want, if your team is going to run 1950s style football, it's Arthur Smith. And that is great. A great pairing that Pittsburgh has with him this year as their OC. DeAndre Hopkins is apparently planning on playing week 1 against the Chicago Bears. This, according to Brian Callahan, their head coach. Hopkins was going to miss a bunch of time with his knee, and he has missed a bunch of time, but it sounds like he's going to be healthy enough to play week 1. He has fallen to wide receiver 44 at the 902. He is in a glut right now, featuring but not limited to Ladd McConkey, Keon Coleman, Marquise Brown, Brian Thomas, and Cortland Sutton. Those are the receivers that are going around him at that 8-9 turn. When you think of what Hopkins went through, when you think of his age, and when you think of the offense that he is playing this season, how does that ADP grab you at the 902, Connor? Is this a still buying opportunity for DeAndre Hopkins drafters?
I go back and forth, because I like the offense in terms of they brought in Brian Callahan. They're going to be passing way, way more than they were in previous years. And I think that that's obvious. They also brought in Calvin Ridley, though, so we have significantly more target competition, and Tyler Boyd to fill the slot. I worry because we saw DeAndre Hopkins come back last year, essentially, and just be not a decoy, but like he clearly wasn't 100%. He was playing like 60 to 75% of the snaps for the last like 10 weeks of the season, basically. And he had some good games in there, because he's, I think, still a good player, but it wasn't 100%. And I worry with a guy like this who just like kind of toughs it out, that maybe he's just never 100%. And we're getting kind of like a volatile, wide receiver 3/4, which is his price. It's not bad. He's just not a guy that I'm like getting up and I'm excited about right off the bat, I guess, if that makes sense. So
Well,
again,
yeah,
go for it.
I mean, it does. I mean, you're talking about a guy, again, I'm excited for the offense too, but like, this is not a young receiver anymore. He is coming off a knee injury. So there are reasons that he's fallen there. And I'm with you. I think that going back and forth is something I've kind of done on Hopkins too, where sometimes I'll draft him, but because of those other receivers there, I kind of want a smattering of players there. And it's easy for me to pass on Hopkins more often than I draft him there for sure, Connor.
Yeah, it's like I think making Calvin Ridley a target is kind of interesting. He's still going,
Mhm.
6th, 7th round, like late 6, early 7, somewhere in that range. So I think that he's a solid target. I was targeting Hopkins before, again, where he was going, which is like a couple rounds higher. Again, I just worry that this snowballs into like an entire season thing, given his age and everything. And like, he's just not really that viable fantasy producer, a guy that you want that has like incredible amounts of upside, which
Yeah.
you want, I think, in your flexes on a week-to-week basis.
Speaking of an injury snowballing into a year-long thing, Curtis Samuel has turf toe right now. He, according to Sean McDermott, could play week 1 against Arizona. Um, I think that when you look at this situation with the Bills pass catchers, I love Dalton Kincaid this year. After that, kind of for best ball, it doesn't matter, right? But for managed leagues, how do we kind of pick the right Bills receiver on any given week? There's Samuel there. There's also Khalil Shakir. Plenty of Khalil Shakir truthers out there. Keon Coleman, the rookie out of Florida State, by way of Michigan State, is another guy that I know people are getting excited about, and high stakes drafters are starting to move him up boards. When you look at this Samuel thing, I was really excited about him this season as catching a ton of balls. Now I'm not so sure. This is turf toe, man. I mean, we've
Yeah.
heard turf toe knocking people out for months at a time, and I know that there's a chance he plays week 1. Isn't this just an easy way to say no on Samuel and yes on Shakir and Coleman?
Yeah, I think so. And Kincaid, just more
And
Kincaid. I
Kincaid,
mean,
yeah.
like it's one of those things where I was super excited about Samuel. He was like a prime target for me in the 9th, 10th, 11th rounds. Like I thought he was a great ad there. And now at this point, I'm really worried about him. Like again, this is another thing that I think can cause problems all year. He was non-committal on week 1. I don't know if you heard that interview, that's not a great sign. That's not what you want, especially if they don't really have much clarity there. I do. So I've kind of, the way I've shifted this is like was never really a Keon Coleman guy. I know that he's had some great training camp highlights. He's hilarious. I think he's a funny
Yes.
guy, but like from a profile standpoint, Matt Harmon labeled like he wasn't a very good separator against man coverage. He was just kind of big. He tested okay, like his RAS was good, but he just ran a 4.64. And then like there's been multiple reports in camp that he's not really separating all that well, and he's still kind of like learning the nuances of being a receiver. There were some clips early in camp too that were like, hey, he's still kind of learning. We'll see from there. He's going to play a big role based on his preseason usage. He's going to be on the field a ton. But I just don't know if he's going to earn that many targets, like especially if he's competing with Kincaid. I think Khalil Shakir is the big beneficiary here if Samuel kind of working his way back in. I believe Peter Schrager just labeled that he could catch 90 plus balls. I mean, to me, that seems outrageous. But, I think that like as a breakout guy and a guy like Schrager, who's got, ears to the ground in a lot of these places, I thought that was kind of notable as well. So I think Shakir could be kind of a good late round target at this point.
Let's go out, and I'm with you on Shakir for sure. Let's go out to Twitch, who I think it's the Rougarou. If I'm pronouncing that right, I apologize if I'm not. Who should be the second overall pick? Christian McCaffrey is for sure going first. Now, in the FFPC, I've seen a smattering of guys go number 1 overall. I've seen McCaffrey, Hall, Bijan Robinson. I've seen Amon-Ra St. Brown. I go first. I've seen Tyreek Hill and CeeDee Lamb go first overall. So if you are certain that McCaffrey is going to be the first one off the board in your draft, Connor, and you have the second pick, who is number 2 for you?
So I actually just fired up an FFPC main event 2 days ago, and I had the second pick. And I was doing this with Ryan Noonan as well from 4 for 4. And we went back and forth. So I think in a vacuum, CeeDee Lamb or Tyreek Hill, you can make the case for either, are better picks than anyone else. But because of the way that FFPC boards shake out and kind of mapping out drafts, we picked Bijan Robinson, which is a little bit of a hot take, but the depth at receiver in FFPC in this season we just felt was massive. It's just like one of those things where I've been targeting a running back early and then a quarterback and an elite tight end, or trying to get one of each at least. And then the wide receivers in middle rounds are just so good. And then we talked about earlier, there's that tier of running backs, like the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th round, where they're like fringe RB2s basically every week that you can make a case for. So that's how I've been mostly building my team. So that's kind of why I went with Bijan. And there's been talk about from the offensive coordinator, from the head coach, about how Bijan's the next Christian McCaffrey. There was some, I think, out of context beat reporter speak in the last couple of days on Twitter about Tyler Algier seeing 14 carries a game and it being like a 50-50 split. I think that, there was a quote as well that said Tyler Algier is a good player from the OC, that he's going to play a lot. I think that there's just a lot of uncertainty in terms of roles. But what we do know is that they've spoken since back in February all the way to now, saying that they want Bijan Robinson to be like a massive part of their offense. So our projections are pretty bullish on him, but I think you could project anywhere from like 60 to 75% of the total touches in the backfield to be Bijan's, which in an offense like the Falcons, great offensive line, Kirk Cousins in there, Zach Robinson at OC, like all these things coming together. I think he's like a really high floor and then a massive ceiling if he does see more work than we're expecting for that. So I kind of like that floor ceiling combo for Bijan.
And there you go. And the Rougarou says it is full PPR. He was actually leaning towards CeeDee Lamb. And I'll wrap up this segment with this question. What concerns you more, Connor, if you are drafting and at the 2 or the 3 and you made up your mind you're going to pick between Hill and Lamb? What's more concerning, the Hill thumb injury or the fact that CeeDee Lamb has missed all this time in training camp?
Probably actually the Hill thumb injury. I'm not really worried about CD holding out. It seems like despite Jerry Jones talking some trash and saying they don't need to pay him, Jerry can't get out of his own way. I think they're going to end up, caping up here and paying him. So I feel pretty good about that. And whereas the Hill injury, I guess, is a little bit more, ominous. I still think both are going to be fine. And I think both are great options. If like from a roster construction standpoint, you're fine with them at 2-3. I think it's really tough to poke too many holes in first round picks, to be honest.
Yeah. And tough to poke holes in Juan Pena Jr.'s team that he just posted on YouTube. Great job, Juan. I love the quarterbacks. The running backs are really, really good. Kenneth Walker, Josh Jacobs, Kyron Williams, Jerome Ford, Breece Hall. That is fantastic. And you still get DJ Moore, Calvin Ridley, and others at receiver. So nice job there. Nice job by Connor Allen here in this first segment. We're going to find out where he stands on certain players, and coming up, players like Christian Kirk, Ladd McConkey. Let's get into Jake Ferguson as well. He is Connor Allen from 4 for 4. I'm Eric Balkman from the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show, and we roll on the Better Sports Network right after this.
Inflation is bad. When FFPC entered the high-stakes fantasy football arena in 2008, the grand prize of the FFPC main event was $75,000. Today, after 15-plus years of setting the industry standard, the FFPC main event has a $1 million grand prize. Since 2021, the FFPC Best Ball Tournament grand prize has tripled, and the Superflex Best Ball Tournament is now the largest contest of its kind in the world.
Football. This month, more men and women will go draft than ever before in our country's history. With prize pools at record highs, multiple fantasy players will become millionaires this year playing the game they love. This month, thousands of drafters will compete in redraft, best ball and dynasty leagues, and with innovative formats, they can look forward to a host of high-stakes competition. It's August again in fantasy football, and under the FFPC, high-stakes fantasy is bigger and better than ever before. Why would you ever settle for less?
you want to draft for $1 million, you can do so tonight in the Fantasy Pros Championship at myffpc.com. A $1 million grand prize, $6 million plus prize pool, pays down to 1,000th place. Check it out, myffpc.com. This is the last week for slow 6-hour drafts, but live drafts are popping off on the top of the hour every hour until 1 a.m. Eastern time tonight. myffpc.com. He's Connor Allen from 4 for 4 Fantasy Football, handling the bets, high stakes fantasy football over there. Great stuff from you, Connor. I've been posting a lot of your pieces for 4 for 4 in our FFPC email that goes out every day too, because I think you're doing great work there, and we're learning a lot about where you stand on certain players. I want to pick your brain and find out where you stand on some other players. Let's talk about Justin Jefferson, a player that's going mid-first round in a sea of confusion at wide receiver. Jamar Chase, not practicing. CeeDee Lamb, not practicing. Tyreek Hill, thumb injury. So I think, and obviously Jefferson, Sam Darnold is your quarterback all season, as long as he stays healthy. So as I look at the ADP on him right now, again, over the last 2 days in the Fantasy Pros Championship, Justin Jefferson comes in at wide receiver 5 at the 108. Where do you, Connor Allen, stand on Justin Jefferson this year?
Yeah, I like him. And it's the Sam Darnold concern is very, very valid. I mean, he has been largely a terrible quarterback for most of his career. But that being said, I think that this offense has worked wonders. We saw Nick Mullins to have multiple massive games. And I don't really think Nick Mullins is very good either in a vacuum. So I think that could help. We did see Sam Darnold get some good coaching last year in San Francisco. Like, I think that there's some potential for him to be okay and be a gunslinger, which is what we want for fantasy. But why I like Justin Jefferson this year is because his target competition is way shakier than what it looks like on paper. TJ Hawkinson might return in week 7, week 8. Who knows when he's like fully go there. So then it's basically just looking at Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison. Jordan Addison, maybe he has a suspension this year. Maybe he doesn't. I think that's like, maybe doesn't really matter that much, because now we're looking at basically 2 guys to feed instead of 3 for most of the year here. And it's Justin Jefferson. At the end of the day, like, those 2 guys being there doesn't really impact him that much in terms of his like overall floor, but his ceiling without them is like massive. He'll have like some 12, 13 target games, I think, early in the season that will be huge. So I think Justin Jefferson's a great target. Obviously one of the best receivers in the NFL. I'm fine with him in that range. Like, after that initial tier of guys, the CD, the Tyreek Hill, I like Bijan over him. And I think Amon-Ra St. Brown, like him and Amon-Ra St. Brown, you can kind of, it's like a toss-up for me. So that's kind of the range that I'm taking him in. And I think that he's a solid target this year. I completely understand the quarterback concerns, though, and it may not always look pretty. It's probably not going to be for the faint of hearts, but I'm excited about him this year. I think the total volume will be interesting.
Yeah, I think I've said from the get-go, Darnold is a good enough quarterback, and Kevin O'Connell's a good enough coach where they can make Justin Jefferson return mid-first round value. So that's that's a concern, but at the same time, I do think they find a way to get it done. Now, here's a fun one. We do a lot of fun ones tonight. Tank Dell, for the first time, I think all drafting season. Don't quote me on that. He is on the cusp of catching Stephon Diggs in redraft leagues. I shouldn't say he's on the cusp, but he's never been this close. Nico Collins in Houston, still going at the 307, wide receiver 15. Diggs has fallen to wide receiver 25 at the 503. Tank Dell, wide receiver 29 at the 510 right now. I seem to be consuming a lot of content, anti-Diggs content over the last couple of weeks. And I'm hearing a lot of positive stuff about Tank Dell. So where do you stand as we talk about Texans receivers, but specifically, Connor, where do you stand on Tank Dell at the 510 as wide receiver 29?
This is one of the hardest situations to parse through. I think kind of like the Bears situation in terms of their receiving core, like that trio there where there's 3 pretty talented players. I'm just drafting all of them, in different leagues and trying to gain exposure through different ways. So I'll have a Tank Dell team, a Nico Collins team, Stephon Diggs team, because when you're looking at this Texans team, when they're going to be 2 wide receiver sets, it seems like it's going to be Diggs and Nico Collins, which is great. But they play a lot of 3 wide receiver sets. So how much does that really matter? And then we look at their pass rate. A lot of it made of their early down pass rate was really, really low to start last year. Like, it was like one of the lowest in the league, like bordering the Arthur Smiths and everything like that. But that's because they didn't really have a ton of faith in CJ Stroud yet. Nico Collins and Tank Dell were nobodies entering last year. No one really cared about them except for the high stakes and dynasty people that, were really invested. But now at this point, they're household names, and like they're good players. I think that they're legitimate good players on a good offense. And we saw Bobby Slowick like ratchet up their pass rate on early downs like massively in the second half of last season and in the playoffs. So that gives me a lot of confidence that this team is going to be towards the top in pass rate over expectation and be able to support all three of these weapons to have good outings here. I think Nico Collins is like their locked in alpha, outside receiver that's going to have some massive games and probably have a reasonable floor. But then I think Tank Dell and Stephon Diggs are both very valid options here. If you look at the games where Nico Collins and Tank Dell both played 60% of the snaps last year in 7 games together. Tank Dell had one more target than him, 53 to 52. He had 2 fewer receptions. He had whatever. It was 600 to 571 yards. Wow. Tank Dell had more touchdowns than him. He scored 2 more half PPR fantasy points. I know this is full PPR, so it was probably about even. Literally, we're talking about a dead even split, and we're getting like a 3-ish, 2 to 3 round difference here between the two. Now the issue is, what does Stephon Diggs do? How does that impact the whole thing? So that whole wrench throws into it there, I think adds another layer to this. But my advice is just try and take at least one in every draft that you do.
What's your concern level on one of these guys busting? Not completely busting, but busting at that draft capital, because Collins is going in the 3rd round. Diggs and Dell are both going in the 5th round. That's a lot to ask of CJ Stroud to keep all 3 of these guys relevant at those ADP levels. What's your concern level that maybe one of these guys, or maybe more than one of these guys, don't pan out again at that draft level?
Yeah, I think I would actually be most worried about Stephon Diggs because at the end of last season, I was betting his unders virtually every week, and that was a cash cow because he was cooked. I mean, he wasn't I know that he wasn't really on the same wavelength as Josh, and I think that there was some stuff going on behind the scenes that we weren't really aware of. But he didn't look good. He wasn't moving all that well. Again, maybe it was injuries, but he's getting older. He's one of those guys that I struggle with because he's obviously been uber talented, and I think that in a vacuum, his skill set of quick separation, route running, generally translates to be an older wide receiver and be okay. He doesn't just rely on elite athleticism or, burning people downfield, stuff that you hit a cliff and you're basically just done. He doesn't really have that. He's always just been kind of a good separator and route runner, which I think does translate. So I think that there's still a chance that he's cooked. We did see at the end of last year, he didn't look good. But, again, if he was just injured or, wasn't on the same page as Josh, he could come in and be an awesome receiver. But I do think he's probably the most volatile.
Yeah, and I probably would agree with that based on what we saw at the end of last year. I guess it kind of gives me hope, or maybe, I don't know, maybe it shouldn't, that the Texans voided that last year of Diggs' deal, knowing that you don't need any more motivation, Stephon. What you need to do here. Let's stick in the same division with the Jacksonville Jaguars. Calvin Ridley is gone, which should mean wheels up for Christian Kirk in that offense. However, they did go out and sign both Gabe Davis, and they drafted Brian Thomas. Evan Engram coming off a 100 plus catch season as well. Christian Kirk is kind of like the forgotten man. He is going at the 606, wide receiver 32. Where do you stand on Christian Kirk this year, Connor Allen?
Yeah, and he also got injured. He picked up a little nick, which it sucks. Feels like all these mid-round wide receivers are picking up little injuries here and there and giving me pause. I generally philosophically, I was actually telling John Paulson this the other day that I just don't draft guys who get injured in preseason. I rarely do. But Christian Kirk might be a guy I'm willing to make an exception for because we have, rookie Brian Thomas Jr. coming in. And then, we have basically Evan Engram there. It's, in my opinion, I think Brian Thomas Jr. is probably going to play some of that Calvin Ridley role, kind of the outside receiver. And then same with Gabe Davis, just field stretching, basically, we're out there running cardio. But the reports were the opposite. The reports were that Brian Thomas was running, wind sprints and just kind of field stretching, almost like a Zay Jones kind of role. And Gabe Davis was in a Calvin Ridley role. So my head is in a bit of a pretzel, but the reality is that I think that Christian Kirk was a very, very viable fantasy target, just over the middle, getting open in quick spaces and being kind of that safety blanket, plus being the featured guy with other people clearing out, space over the middle for him. So I think the Kirk in the 6th, 7th round is a good target, even given his injury. Again, the injury gives me a little bit of pause, but I think he's a solid look here.
Continuing with the receiver theme here, where do you stand on Deontay Johnson, Connor? David Newton, who covers the Panthers for ESPN, reported 2 days ago that Deontay Johnson apparently hurt his foot or his ankle, and this is it's very on brand for Johnson, because this is what happens with him. It looks like he's going to miss a significant amount of time, and then he miraculously pulls the old Paul Pierce, gets back on the court or on the field, as it were, and starts crushing it again. Dave Canales, the new head coach there, has already said the offense is going to feature Johnson. It's going to run through Johnson for sure. And this gets me very excited. I think we have to take the injury into account here, of, the nebulousness of it. We don't know how serious it is. But when I tell you that he's wide receiver 36 at the 6'12", where do you stand on Deontay Johnson?
Yeah, I've been all in all offseason. So these injuries are just, giving me heart palpitations.
So it's another guy who gets dinged up, right? It's just another one.
Exactly. It's a guy that was like a borderline auto click for me in the 7th round all offseason. Now he's creeping up to the 6th round because people, I think, are just like coming around like, hey, this is going to be the focal point of the offense. Adam Thielen was like a great wide receiver last year, even in a terrible offense with Bryce Young. So I think Bryce Young is going to be better. Dave Canales has done a great job, resurrected the career of Baker Mayfield, helped Geno Smith prior. He's done a great job, I think, before, and has literally said, like you mentioned, he's going to be the focal point of the offense. Like when we're looking to drop a play, where's Deontay Johnson? That's basically what he's saying. So if Deontay's healthy, you're starting him in your fantasy lineup. You're getting, I think, wide receiver 2/3 basically every week. So yeah, 6-7 turn. I'm still in on Deontay Johnson despite the injury. Again, I know I just said I don't like to draft injured guys, and generally I don't, but the opportunity cost here is not crazy in the 6th, 7th round.
And the other thing too is, like, Johnson seemingly plays well through these injuries, and I should say this. He plays through these injuries, and he plays well doing it too. Like, he's been pretty good even when he's been dinged up, which is why I'm more. This is another guy. I was with you. Like, this is a player that nobody's respecting. Full PPR with the FFPC. Well, obviously I don't play in the FFPC because I'm an employee, but in all the other leagues I'm playing in, yeah, I'm loving up some Deontay Johnson. And even still, he has not ascended to a spot where I'm not comfortable taking him. So I still like him there. Let's do this. Marquise Brown. Nope. Ladd McConkey. Let's do Ladd McConkey first. The rookie receiver out of Georgia. He has initially been working with Josh Palmer and DJ Chark in 2-minute drills with the Chargers. Now, I know Quentin Johnston made a big play either today or yesterday where he catches a touchdown. So he's still there. But when you look at what the Chargers sunk into Ladd McConkey, this is a player that they obviously have feelings on about making a significant part of their offense, even in his rookie season. Wide receiver 42 at the 808 right now. So he's going lower than Johnson and Kirk here. Where do you stand on Ladd McConkey?
The Quinn Johnson highlight was hilarious because even though he caught a touchdown, it was like the most awkward.
Was it really?
Ever? Yeah, it was like I saw it and I was like, I guess it was a good catch, but I was like, why did he move his body like that? That's so strange. But anyways, I think he's basically the wide receiver 4. Kind of cooked. Maybe they do some design stuff for him. I think you mentioned it here. It's going to be probably Josh Palmer as like their main, X receiver. I think we're going to see a lot of Ladd McConkey in the slot. But generally, this team's going to run the ball a ton. Like we know Greg Roman likes to run the ball. We know Harbaugh likes to run the ball. They address the offensive line in the offseason with the draft. So I think they're going to run the ball a ton. When they do throw the ball, though, I think the Ladd McConkey is going to be kind of the security blanket here. And he's almost kind of going to be like a Christian Kirk, Keenan Allen light, I think, as a rookie. So I think at his current ADP, he's solid. Again, another guy who is injured. I think that he picked up an injury at some point and has been kind of in and out. I think he'll be fine, but he's dealt with injuries most of his career as well. So it's like something to pay attention to, and may not be a guy that you're counting on as a weekly starter. But I think from fill-in standpoints and maybe as like a wide receiver 4/flex rotating in, like he'll have some big games this season, especially if he starts clicking with Justin Herbert.
The player that I wanted to talk about next, and again, another receiver that I was basically, I wouldn't say all in on, but if I was an emoji, when he was sitting next to Patrick Mahomes was it the Mavericks basketball game in the playoffs? Yeah. I would have been the looking eyes emoji, right? Like when I saw him, I'm like, oh, Hollywood Brown's next to Patrick Mahomes. This is interesting. So, I was still very excited about him. Now it's a little bit different because he's hurt. he's sternoclavicular sprain or whatever it was. That's going to knock him out probably into the regular season, maybe week 2, week 3. He comes back. We don't know yet. He's fallen to the 902 right now. He is going almost 2.5 rounds after Xavier Worthy right now. And he's definitely, oh man, 4.5 rounds plus behind Rashee Rice. Where do you stand on Hollywood Brown as wide receiver 45 at the 902, Connor?
Yeah, I was also pretty interested in Marquise Brown entering the year. Now I almost worry that a guy like Marquise Brown, who's dealt with a lot of injuries, kind of over the last couple of years, that he kind of, works his way into Kadarius Toney territory in a sense. Like I was thinking about this last night. You have Rashee Rice, you have Travis Kelce. It seems like Xavier Worthy stretching the field like well enough. I mean, they're going to work Marquise Brown. He's probably not going to play, maybe a week or two in. Like I think he's going to work his way into the lineup slowly. I just don't know when is he going to be a factor. Like how much of a target share is he going to be? Like, what does that look like? I think best case scenario coming in was he was the field stretcher plus, that was I think the upside was there and massive as long as he was healthy. But now it looks less and less likely that Rashee Rice is going to be suspended at this point. And Xavier Worthy seems to be playing well and making plays virtually every training camp highlight and report that we see. So I just worry about where does Marquise Brown fit in at this point? Because if their rookies crushing and all the other guys are crushing it, there's just not much of a reason to put Brown out there other than almost Kadarius Toney. They use him randomly and he had some good games, but was not consistent at all and basically always injured.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing that we have to worry about, obviously, with a player now, given the draft capital again, you're creeping almost to double-digit rounds here. So
right.
the effect that he is going to have on your team is minimalized a little bit, and he might be a good stash again, as you said earlier. You win the money in the final weeks of the season when we hope Hollywood Brown is healthy.
If you have a Chief stack, just add him.
Exactly. That's a perfect way of looking at it too. Cortland Sutton is the next guy on our list. There's a lot of receivers I'm just noticing. I didn't realize I had this many on here. Cortland Sutton, wide receiver for the Denver Broncos, a player that I have talked about quite a bit this offseason and quite frankly have not made my mind up on. I seem to be going back and forth. I have him in a couple of dynasty leagues. I couldn't get anything for him. So I'm standing pat on him another year. And now he's got a new quarterback. In fact, for the first time in 40 plus years, the Broncos are going to be starting a rookie quarterback week 1 of the season. His name is Bo Nix, and he's going to be throwing passes to Cortland Sutton. Sutton right now, if we look at his ADP, wide receiver 47 at the 904, very, very close to where Hollywood Brown's going. And yet Sutton is healthy, caught 10 touchdowns last year. Not a sticky stat, I know, but he still put up points. Is he being disrespected? Where do you stand on Cortland Sutton right now, Connor?
Yeah, I'm really interested in a guy like Cortland Sutton for a couple of reasons. I've been thinking about this more and more in the last week or so with the development of the Broncos. Obviously, Bo Nix looked really good in preseason. Mm-hmm. I go back and forth. Is that Kenny Pickett preseason hype of him playing really well, or is it real? Is this real hype? And I think he's a perfect fit in Sean Payton's offense. He's accurate. He gets the ball out quick. He's mobile, which is something Sean Payton hasn't even necessarily had that often. He's almost like the anti-Russell Wilson in terms of a lot of ways. And we have the Broncos defense projects to be really bad, really, really, really bad outside of Patrick Surtain. And so when you factor that in, I think this is shaping up to be almost a stereotypical Sean Payton team that we saw for a lot of his time in New Orleans, which is a terrible defense. Drew Brees in the offense trying their best, scoring as much as possible. And where does that fit into this? I think it leaves all the Broncos really, really undervalued from a pass catching standpoint. So kind of this is one of the teams I was alluding to with Washington, just because this team may not win a lot of games, their offense is going to be pretty interesting if Bo Nix is at least fine. And I think that starts with Cortland Sutton, who's, could find himself really, really undervalued at wide receiver 47. Jerry Jeudy's gone. Sutton ran a route on 19 of 20 dropbacks in the last preseason game with the starters. He's the primary guy, and his only target competition is Tim Patrick and Josh Reynolds is starting, it looks like, as well, with Marvin Mims and Troy Franklin. I don't know if they're going to make much of an impact. I think they might be just kind of DOA at this point, unfortunately. So
yeah, that's what I don't understand. You mentioned a lot of good things and it was almost all positive. Why? What's the reason for? And I guess you can't give me this because you're yeah, Balky, I've been drafting Sutton all over the place. I don't know why no one else is. It makes no sense. And he could be one of those guys too that it's not a sexy pick. It's not something we get too excited about, but at the same time, this is a guy that can help you win as a flex player, maybe even a second wide receiver certain weeks this year too. Let's do here. Okay, sniped you son on Twitch right now. If you think Jamar Chase were to hold out, let's call it 3 games like Jonathan Taylor the other year, what round would you take him? Number one, I don't think I should ask you about this. Connor, is he going to hold out Jamar Chase? I don't see it happening.
I don't think so. I know I really struggle with these things.
There's a non-zero chance of it, but I really don't see it happening.
Yeah, Schefter was like hemming and hawing about it, like saying like, "Oh, well, some people have told me that they're going to find a way to get a deal done. Other people have told me that he's not going to step onto the field without a new contract." And it's like, well, that's really tough. I mean, he already sat out an entire season of college because he was like didn't want to play. He already knew he was ready for the NFL. And I know this is obviously a much different situation, but he in some situations he holds the leverage if he really wants to, be a stickler about it. That being said, I think he plays. I think it ends up being fine, just like my opinion, but I don't really have much behind that. I'm a little bit scared of taking him in the first round, to be honest, because I think that there are like 8 or 9 really good players in the first round that I'm like, really, really hyped to take. And then there's him who, if he's healthy, obviously I think he's, a great pick, but if he's not, I worry about him a little bit before like the 108 ish, something like that. So I don't know what round would I take him if he sat out 3 games. Well, this tournament, you win the money in the final round. So someone's going to probably just take him before me in the like second or third round. I would say that. I mean, I think that's JT was like 3rd or 4th round pick, if I remember correctly, a couple of years ago in FFPC.
Yeah. I actually forgot about that he slipped because of that too.
Yeah.
Let's do one more here and let's make it not a wide receiver. It's going to be Jake Ferguson that we're going to talk about. Ferguson had a really good season last year. He's in an offense that features no Michael Gallup anymore, which quite frankly was kind of a non-factor last year. But Jalen Tolbert, Brandon Cooks are there. He's got Ezekiel Elliott catching passes out of the backfield, and then obviously CeeDee Lamb, who is there but not there right now. Ferguson is going as tight end 9. So after the Elite 5, Laporta, Kelsey, McBride, Kincaid, Andrews, then you have Pitts and Ingram, Kittle, who's like a best ball dream, but redraft gets a little bit more dicey. But then it's Ferguson after that. Ferguson in the mid-5th, sort of on a tier by himself. He's a half round behind Ingram and Kittle, and he's a full round plus ahead of Njoku. Where do you stand on Jake Ferguson this year, Connor?
Yeah, he's tough because we haven't projected like right at tight end 9. So not like much projection value. But if you look at this Cowboys team overall, obviously no Tony Pollard. You have some combination of Zeke and Rico Dowdle in the backfield. The offensive line's a little dinged up, but the receiving core is just like really thin. It's like CeeDee Lamb and then, Brandon Cooks, like a bunch of jabronis, guys who are like, I just don't think they're very good. So it's like Ferguson's the number 2 guy in a relatively high volume offense. And so I think that alone gives him some upside. He's not a guy that I'm like stoked to draft. But I think that he's like a fine pick. If you miss out on that elite tier tight ends, and the way your draft's shaking out, you really want a tight end at that spot. I think he's a fine pick. I don't think I can really talk too poorly or positively about him, to be honest.
I lied. Last thing I want to talk about, Vegas Fireman, who is watching us on Twitch tonight. What do you think about the no preseason training turns into regular season injury? That is the point I want to bring up. With Ayuk, with Lamb, and with Chase, I've sort of resigned myself to. I was on a different fantasy show today, and I was saying we're not asking the right question, to quote Jodie Foster from the latest season of True Detective. We're not asking the right question. The right question is, what is going to be these guys, their body's reaction to not having that training camp under their belts? They can train on their own all they want, but you just can't replicate quote unquote football shape, right? And we've seen it. Like, it's a real thing. We've seen these guys who miss training camp for whatever reason, and then they come in and then they get hurt, or they get hurt again, or they re-aggravate something. And that is the problem. That therein lies the rub, right? I know they're going to be there, but how healthy are they going to be? And when I could take a guy like, when I'm deciding in the first round between Jamar Chase or CeeDee Lamb or Justin Jefferson or Amon-Ra St. Brown, it's easier for me to click St. Brown. It's easier for me to click Jefferson and let somebody else deal with Chase and Lamb. I could miss out. They could obviously have the better seasons here, but that's sort of my take on it. Like, every man has its price, and and has his price. And I think I'm going to let these guys slip a little bit more and let somebody else deal with them, because there is that nervousness I have about these guys getting hurt, missing training camp, Connor.
I like the adage, the fantasy one that's like, you rarely win your draft in the first round or your league in the first round, but you can definitely lose it.
Yep.
You can definitely lose it. And so you bring up a great point. There's certainly like asymmetric downside risk, with a lot of these guys. That's just really tough to get behind. And that's something that's interesting too. The preseason training turns into regular season injury. I think that's very, it's a great point. It's one of the reasons, again, I took Bijan Robinson over, CeeDee Lamb and Tyreek Hill. And I think there's a couple guys that I feel really good about, and, a couple guys that I'm a little bit more on the fence about.
Let's do this. That is where Connor Allen stands on so many of these players here. I want to do something I don't think we've done on the show before. We've done Would You Rather Draft before, for sure. But we have a deep dive edition coming up where it's all players that are going in the double-digit rounds. We're going to hit on the Niners backup running back situation. We're going to hit on Lockett and Rashid Shaheed. We're going to hit on Conklin and Likely. I don't think those guys are double digits, or at least both of them. I'm not sure. They might be. Anyway, we're going to find out who Connor Allen would rather draft between these and so much more. You are watching the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network. Eric Balkman and Connor Allen coming at you next.
Flair once said, if you want to be the man, you got to beat the man. And if you want to be the man or woman this fantasy football season, you got to play over at myffpc.com. That's where all the best fantasy gamers play. That's where all the high stakes gamers play, because they've got the high stakes leagues. They have the best formats. They have the best payouts. It's the place to be. And if you win a FFPC main event or a Fantasy Pros Championship contest over there, you put some serious respect on your name and some money in your pocket. Anyone can win their hometown league, right? You're probably a great fantasy gamer. Prove it. You go out and win an event like this, you can go and put in your Twitter bio or X bio, FFPC main event champion. That means something. That's definitive proof that you're one of the best fantasy gamers in the world. So go over to myffpc.com and use promo code COOP. They'll give you $25 when you deposit $35 or more. And now you're on your road to greatness, right? You could even do an online draft, or you can go and draft in Las Vegas with the stars. Draft at Planet Hollywood for the FFPC main event. That's where they're all doing it. It's awesome stuff. So get set up now so that you can be a star this year. You can be the man. Just like Ric Flair, you can be a champion. Woo!
Inflation is bad. When FFPC entered the high-stakes fantasy football arena in 2008, the grand prize of the FFPC main event was $75,000. Today, after 15-plus years of setting the industry standard, the FFPC main event has a $1 million grand prize. Since 2021, the FFPC Best Ball Tournament grand prize has tripled, and the Superflex Best Ball Tournament is now the largest contest of its kind in the world.
Two different best ball tournaments going on right now with the Fantasy Football Players Championship at myffpc.com. Our best ball tournament features a $300,000 grand prize. That's $100,000 more than last year. $125 to enter that, and $35 to enter our Superflex best ball tournament, which is coming in at a $100,000 grand prize. That's double of what it was last year. Register now. myffpc.com is where to go for that. This is the last week for 6-hour slow drafts. So if you want to get those in, get them in now so they can get done before the start of the regular season, which will take place basically 2 weeks from almost right now. It's going to be so much fun watching the Ravens and Chiefs getting it on, but we do have plenty of drafting to get to before then, and who better to help us than 4for4's own Connor Allen. Follow him on the X at Connor Allen NFL. Let's talk about some of these guys that you'd rather draft this year. Connor, the players I mentioned, I shouldn't say that a good plurality of these players that we're going to be talking about will be in the double-digit rounds. but none of them are like high draft picks at all. So it's easy for us to say as volume drafters is, okay, well, I'm just going to get a smattering of these guys. For the purposes of this exercise, let's assume you only have one draft or very few drafts. And this is the only time you're making a decision on these two players for, to try to flesh this out as best we can. So I'm going to lead things off in the Would You Rather Draft Deep Dive Edition. It's going to be a couple of running backs, a rookie one in Blake Corum for the Los Angeles Rams, and old Coyote himself, Rico Dowdle. I shouldn't say old. Ezekiel Elliott's really old Coyote on that team. But when you look at these guys, who would you rather draft? Both of them are going. Corum is running back 38 at the 10:01. Rico Dowdle is running back 40 at the 10:07. So Corum is going slightly ahead right now. Who would you rather draft?
So I want to preface this segment by saying, especially for the running backs, that a lot of it has to do with like the team that you've built prior. And I think I would say that's arguably the most important point of who you draft. So in this situation specifically, if you need a guy who can contribute right away and will play a big, like not big, but probably be the 1A to 1B, in some scenario with Ezekiel Elliott, I think Rico Dowdle is your guy. You need a contributor right away who maybe can, fill in the first couple of weeks. I think that's your guy. If Zeke goes down or Rico Dowdle is like the number one running back, I think he has some upside. He's probably like a high-end RB2, maybe mid RB2, somewhere in that scenario. Blake Corum, on the other hand, I think is very little like week-to-week early value. But if Kyron Williams, who's a smaller guy of stature, has held up last year under a lot of carries, but we don't have a massive track record of that. If he goes down, Blake Corum's like Kyron Williams 2.0. That's like, in my opinion, he's like a locked-in RB1, like top 6-7 running back basically every week. So he has way more contingent upside in my mind, but way lower floor on a week-to-week basis.
So, but isn't that kind of what we're looking for? Obviously you said
right.
It kind of depends what your team looks like. But to me, like, I think I'd be more likely to choose the higher ceiling guy at that point of the draft, just because I'm fine with keeping that stash on my roster. That could be good. And maybe it's just, I don't have to wait all season. Maybe there's a pocket where, Kyron Williams misses 3 games in October. That still can be very, very valuable for you as
massive.
Well. Battle of the backup running backs. Braylon Allen or Chuba Hubbard. Braylon Allen right now is going as running back 52 at the 13:02. Chuba Hubbard about a round before him, running back 47 at the 12:01. Again, we're comparing Allen, a guy who, for all intents and purposes and everything I've consumed, certainly seems like he is going to be the backup to Breece Hall. Hubbard could be the starter while Brooks is out, but when Brooks returns from this ACL, maybe Hubbard becomes 1B or a backup. And certainly most of us are projecting a lot more points on the Jets offense this year than the Panthers. Who would you rather draft, Braylon Allen or Chuba Hubbard?
This is a really similar scenario because we have Chuba Hubbard, who I think is going to be the number one running back by a lot in the first 3 weeks. And they have some good matchups. Like he's going to be, probably a low end or a high end RB3 kind of in those first few weeks. He's going to see a ton of work in an offense that I think we project to be better. They spent a bunch of money on the offensive line. Like they should be a little bit better. But again, what is the upside? Like, is that really going to happen all season? No, because they just drafted Jonathan Brooks in the middle rounds. He's probably going to return weeks 3, 4, slow ramp up weeks 5, 6, and then be full go, later in the season, which is going to end up being a problem, for Chuba Hubbard's upside. And he's like, even floor, it will be kind of weak on a week-to-week basis. Whereas Braylon Allen, again, I don't think he sees more than 5 touches a game, probably off the rip. But if Breece Hall, who's gotten injured before, gets injured, Braylon Allen is a league winner. Like that's like he is a pretty much a defined league winner in my mind.
The Niners backup running back situation gets juicier and juicier every day that Christian McCaffrey is not out there. And I don't know if we have a correct answer in this in everything that I've read and listened to. And according to the ADP data with the FFPC players don't know who it is yet either, because Elijah Mitchell is going as running back 58 at the 15:02. Jordan Mason is going as running back 59 at the 15:03. They're back-to-back not only in running backs, Connor, they're back-to-back picks right now in the early 15th round. You can only have one of them. Who would you rather draft, Mitchell or Mason?
the last few years I've been a Mitchell truther, but in this scenario, based on the reports, I'm going to go with Mason. It seems like he's kind of had the, a little bit more hype lately, kind of gotten the hot hand. Like Mitchell's been fine whenever CMC's been out or like kind of like, at the end of games. But I think Mason, maybe has a shot at this point. So I think both are viable, but if I'm picking one, it's probably Mason.
Mitchell and Isaac Guerrero, who was out of Louisville, both returned to practice yesterday. And Mitchell and Jordan Mason, it seemed like they have a leg up on Guerrero, obviously. And
Yeah.
Mason has been, playing well in Mitchell's absence. Now it's going to be interesting to see what happens and how the Niners treat it now that Mitchell's back at practice. We could see another flip if all of a sudden Mitchell's getting the reps with the twos or the ones in this case, since McCaffrey's out, then we could be liking us some Elijah Mitchell. But as it stands right now, I think I'm with you. I'm seeing Jordan Mason shoot up draft boards right now. Kev Wheeler, former co-host of this show, is saying Jordan Mason as well right now. So that is where we're at on that. Speaking of Jordans, let's go to Jordan Addison or Khalil Shakir. We talked a little bit about these offenses. We talked a little bit about Shakir earlier. We didn't hit on Addison. We talked about the Vikings a little bit. But when you look at these guys in where they're going in the Fantasy Pros Championship right now, you have Jordan Addison as wide receiver 50, I believe. Yeah, wide receiver 50 at the 10:06. Shakir is going as wide receiver 49 at the 9:10. So again, back-to-back wide receivers here. You made your thoughts known on Khalil Shakir. Jordan Addison, who would you rather draft between Shakir and Addison?
Yeah, right now I'm Shakir. Mentioned a lot of it earlier. I think that at this point, the way that the target shares are shaking out, I think that Shakir is going to be the guy. But Jordan Addison, like he was just very like long touchdown dependent last year, and so I think TJ Hawkinson being out kind of helps him early in the season. But I don't know if maybe an enhanced target share early in the season is really going to help you win leagues. And how does that development happen? I think there's questions about Sam Darnold. I don't have questions about Justin Jefferson. I don't have that many questions about TJ Hawkinson when he's healthy, which is going to be the final weeks. I do have questions about Jordan Addison's, like, I guess, week-to-week consistency, which, I mean, he was not consistent at all. It was, catch a 60-yard touchdown. He's going to be great that week. If he doesn't, he's not going to do anything. So that seemed to be kind of his week-to-week outlook there.
We'll go to a Would You Rather draft live on YouTube right now. Jack Connolly piping in with a question. It looks like he's made up his mind that he's going to be taking a running back in his draft, but he doesn't know which one it's going to be. He's narrowed it down to Jahmyr Gibbs, Jonathan Taylor, and Saquon Barkley. Now, right now, at this point in the Fantasy Pros Championship, Taylor, Gibbs, and Barkley are all going back to back to back. Running back 4, 5, and 6. And at the 112, the 202, and the 202 on average. Highly bunched up. Connor, if you're taking one of these running backs in the first round or maybe the early second, who's it going to be between Taylor, Gibbs, and Barkley?
This is really tough. I don't think there's necessarily a wrong answer. If I'm taking one, it's probably Gibbs, just because, I think that he has a solid floor. Like he's just super efficient, like played really well. Like we saw his growth towards the end of last season. Like in the beginning of the season, he wasn't really hitting holes correctly, like was missing some blocks. I think he got way better at the end of the season. And I think they saw that too. So I don't really know that he is like, from week one, maybe the same upside as a Jonathan Taylor or Saquon, but like the, contingent upside if David Montgomery goes down or he's like significantly outplaying him. Like, I think that all those things are, like, he's running back. He could be running back 1 overall if he is like the full share and he's really crushing it in a Detroit offense that is super, super explosive. So like, I think that I would go with Gibbs, but I mean, if you want to take Taylor or Saquon, I'm not going to, think that that's a bad pick by any means.
And I think it's interesting you say Gibbs, because out of these 3 guys, Gibbs is the only guy dealing with an injury right now, which which means one of two things. Connor, you're either not concerned with the injury, or if Gibbs had not suffered this hamstring injury, it'd be Gibbs in a slam dunk, right?
Yeah, I'm just not worried about the injury, to be honest.
Okay.
It seems like he's going to be good to go for week 1. Again, maybe a slightly slow ramp up. But yeah, I'm just not too worried about the injury. So
I want to compare 2 offenses for this next Would You Rather draft. An offense that really came into its own at the end of last season, the last 2 months of the season were the Green Bay Packers. or was the Green Bay Packers offense, I should say. And one of the players who's been making a lot of plays, again, for the third consecutive year, we keep hearing his name over and over and over again. Whether that translates to regular season success this year, we shall see. But Romeo Doubs is wide receiver 51 at the 1009 right now. An offense that is very, very different in Los Angeles is the Chargers. They're probably going to want to run the ball as much as they can because of their head coach, Jim Harbaugh, because of their offensive coordinator, Greg Roman, and then because of Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins joining the fray in Los Angeles. You have Justin Herbert, who's a franchise quarterback, but you lost Mike Williams. You lost Keenan Allen. Who replaces him? You said earlier, Josh Palmer is probably going to be the X there. And Romeo Doubs could be the X, quote unquote, X in the Green Bay offense this year, too. Who would you rather draft, though? Is it Romeo Doubs or is it Joshua Palmer?
Yeah, I think both are good options. If I'm choosing one, I like Doubs a little bit better for a couple of reasons. We've seen Doubs, had the highest routes run rate last year. Early in camp, he's basically been locked into, kind of their top receiver in terms of like total routes run. I think this offense is massive upside. There's some rumors of Christian Watson and Dontavian Wicks and Jaden Reed only playing basically in 3 wide receiver sets. I think it's going to be volatile, but again, you're getting him in like really late. Like these guys are both like pretty late picks that I think can be, viable flex fill-ins on a weekly basis, especially in your second option there. So I think the Doubs is probably my pick here, but Palmer is like, I'm just kind of worried he's just a jag. Like, he's just like not, just a guy. Like he's not really all that good. Whereas Romeo Doubs, I mean, the clip was rotating around Twitter of like Jordan Love drawing up his like play of like, if you could pick any player to fill any position, and Romeo Doubs was Zach's receiver alongside like Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams, and like the all-star crew. And he's like, I want Romeo Doubs out there, so I think that kind of rapport and like growing on that could provide really fruitful. I mean, if this offense does pan out, I know you're a Packers fan. If the Packers play like they did the second half of the season and Romeo Doubs is playing a little bit more and they're connected, with Jordan Love, like he could be an awesome value in the 10th, 11th round here this year.
Yeah, and I can tell you that Packers and Ravens doing joint practices this weekend this week ahead of their preseason finale against each other on Saturday afternoon. And I can tell you that there is a beautiful pass from Jordan Love today, 25 yards in the air. Would have been an easy touchdown for Romeo Doubs coming across the middle, but he dropped the pass, which was really unfortunate. No. Yeah.
Brutal.
I'll tell you what kind of worries me with the Packers this year. I have no problem with them in best ball.
Yeah,
I think it could be maddening drafting even a guy like Jaden Reed. I think it could be maddening having these guys on your team where, 1 week you start Christian Watson and he has 2 for 17. The next week you sit him and he goes 8 for 102 touchdowns. I foresee messiness trying to figure out when to start which Packer this year.
Yeah, that's my biggest issue with it too. And it's kind of led me to not take Jaden Reed, which might come back to bite me, but it's, one of those issues where we saw it. It was maybe in the playoffs, I believe, where the Packers ran a ton of like 12 personnel, 2 tight ends, 2 wide receivers. And Jaden Reed played like 30% of the snaps or something like that. It was like crazy low amount. And he saw only 3 or 4 targets that game. That's in the range of outcomes to happen this year for some games. And like, it's not always something that we know is going to happen. It's just game plan specific, and we don't know what their game plan is going to be on a week-to-week basis. Yeah. So if they view it's an edge to run the ball, to load at the bot, or just be like heavier personnel, they're going to do that. And Jaden Reed's going to get phased out because I think he only played in like 3% of 11 personnel snaps, something like that, or 12 personnel snaps. So it's like he really basically played in like nothing other than 3 wide receiver sets. So that kind of stuff is really, really tough for me to get behind. So it's kind of been a fade Jaden Reed, then take some like, I don't know, stabs late on like Dobbs or Dontavian Wicks or something like that.
And Reed is the highest drafted Packers receiver in the FFPC right now, which it's like, I'm telling. And by the way, I could easily see that Packers offense regressing a little bit this year too, because I do think that they were punching above their weight the last 2 months of the season into the playoffs. I think that between the type of offense that they were in the start of the season last year to the offense they were at the end, I think they end up closer to what they were at the end of the season, but I don't think it's going to be that good. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Jacobs as the new lead running back instead of Aaron Jones. Let's get back to the receivers here. Tyler Lockett or Rashid Shaheed. Tyler Lockett, wide receiver 56 at the 1201 right now. Lockett is a guy that I have drafted over and over and over and over and over again. Dynasty leagues, I have a bunch of them. I've enjoyed the spoils of Tyler Lockett over the course of his career. The problem, I think JSN is going to have a nice bounce back sophomore season this year. I think the offense is more tailored to him. He's making plays in camp, and I think at a minimum, he overtakes Tyler Lockett at some point this season as the second wide receiver on that team. But again, Lockett's not going until the 12th round, so it doesn't cost you much here. Rashid Shaheed is now going 10 picks behind Tyler Lockett at the 12-11. He was rehabbing a strained hamstring, and then he also suffered some kind of toe or foot injury last week, which stinks because this is supposed to be the guy that was going to play opposite Chris Olave and was going to take advantage of potential Olave brackets or Olave double teams. And I was on board with Rashid Shaheed. Now he's hurt not once, but twice. Who would you rather draft here? Because there's a lot to unpack between Tyler Lockett and Rashid Shaheed, Connor.
Yeah, like if you asked me this 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, it's a slam dunk for Shaheed. At this point, I'm just really struggling with it because if he's injured, I mean, they're putting Taysom Hill everywhere. I think Juwan Johnson's coming back healthy. Like Chris Olave, I think just sees a massive target share here. So like it's probably Lockett at this point. Just from a macro perspective, I don't love targeting receivers like this in general later in the draft. I kind of want guys more like, the Brian Thomas Juniors or someone that I think can like ascend potentially into like, a weekly starter or like, someone that I think can be like, has a little bit more upside and flexibility to their game than a Tyler Lockett and Rashid Shaheed, Rashid Shaheed's going to have some big games. Never know if we're going to be able to start him on the right weeks. I think that's going to be like probably a complete disaster. And then Tyler Lockett probably has a higher floor, but again, also has a little bit more volatility. And I don't know what his ceiling looks like with JSN, with DK Metcalf there in a new system. So like, for me, these aren't two guys that I'm not necessarily targeting, later in drafts. I kind of like guys that maybe a little bit more volatility, like contingent upside, I would say.
Contingent upside is like this hot button. Like I'd never heard of the phrase before this year, and now I'm hearing it all over the place. It's hilarious. But not hilarious. I mean, it's good to know, like, because it's a way to compartmentalize a term in a philosophy that we're talking about. Greg Dortch and Andre Yoshevas is next, or are next, I should say. This is deep dive that we get into here. Now we're talking like 18th round, wide receiver 88, and for Dortch, Yoshevas is wide receiver 86, again in the 18th round. I was excited about Jermaine Burton in rookie draft season, drafted him in a lot of spots, but it seems like, and Yoshevas was a guy I picked up at the end of last season, just, not knowing the contract status with Higgins and knowing that Chase might want a new deal. Hey, maybe Yoshevas is a guy that pans out here. And Greg Dortch, I mean, seemingly he's the type of guy where you open the door, a crack, he busts right through. Like he takes advantage of every opportunity he's given. So these guys, they're going late, but when you're trying to win $1 million in the Fantasy Pros Championship or the FFPC main event, sometimes these guys can make a difference in order to get you to the championship round, or maybe, be the guy that you can flex out in the championship round, depending upon what the Cardinals and what the Bengals look like at that point. Who would you rather draft this year, Yoshevas or Dortch?
So I like both, but I think that Yoshevas is my guy for a couple of reasons here. So Yoshevas is going to be the third target in an offense, whereas Dortch is probably third or fourth, depending on the week, with you have Michael Wilson, Marvin Harrison Jr., and Trey McBride. And he's kind of probably, I would say, neck and neck with Michael Wilson in terms of like target share, I would say, this year. Whereas Yoshevas, he's kind of that third option there. I'm not too worried about Jermaine Burton, who seems to still be working his way up the depth chart. I think the long-term upside on Burton's great, but it seems like he's a ways behind right now, where Yoshevas has been like playing really well in camp, was a great producer at Princeton, averaged 70 and 94 yards per game in his final 2 seasons, tested well, 4.43 40-yard dash at 6'3", 205. And then late last season when he kind of came on, week 16 and 18, and 8 and 7 targets, had a 5.36-2 game to end the year. Now we have Joe Burrow back, right? Joe Burrow in his 2 healthy seasons threw for 4,400 and 4,600 yards, along with 34 and 35 touchdowns. In those seasons, the third option on the offense, Tyler Boyd, had 58 catches, 762 yards, and 5 touchdowns, and then 67, 828, and 5 the year after. Wide receiver 34, wide receiver 31 finishes. So like the baseline here is pretty high, and then the upside, like Jamar Chase holds out or holds out. Like you're looking at a smash season for Yoshibas. If Jamar Chase comes back and gets injured, I think like what the other side happens, like, again, it's the same thing. So I think there's contingent upside. I think that there's a reasonable floor. Again, you're getting a guy like, you're in the boonies, you're scrolling way down here, like picking this guy. And so I think at this point, you can't really go wrong. Both are solid options, but for me, it's Andre.
Yeah, I think I think that Yoshivas represents not like a cheat code or anything like that, but I mean, it's so easy for me to. He's got so many paths, right? Like, what if Burton's not ready? What if Higgins doesn't pan out or whatever? What happens if Chase decides that he's not? There's just all these options, and Yoshivas kind of showed out last year that he could be a force if given an opportunity on this team. Force is probably too strong of a word, but fantasy relevant for sure. And Andre Yoshivas, nobody's calling him a force but me. This is why you watch the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sorts Network. Tight ends. Let's get into those. Right now, we have Tyler Conklin, 11-12, tight end 19. Right behind him, tight end 18, beg your pardon. Right behind him is Isaiah Likely, tight end 19 at the 12:08. I have heard arguments for both these guys. I'm not going to reveal who I prefer here. I want to see what you say first. But who would you rather draft, Connor? Tyler Conklin or Isaiah Likely?
For me, it's Conklin because I'm just buying the Jets everywhere I can. I think it's really tough to conceptualize just how bad the quarterbacks he was catching passes from are looking, like Zach Wilson, Mike White, Chris Streveler, Trevor Siemian, Tim Boyle. And then, the highlight was Joe Flacco. That was like the highlight of his career basically so far. I think that Aaron Rodgers unlocks like a new ceiling for Conklin. Conklin ran a route on 70% of dropbacks last season. Seems to be the top tight end target pretty much. Had earned 4+ targets in 13 of 17 games last season. So he's a reasonable target earner, just was playing with terrible, inefficient quarterback play on one of the worst offenses here. And then the Jets, added Mike Williams, but I think they're going to work him back slowly. Other than that, they have like Alan Lazard, Xavier Gibson, Malachi Corley. It's like kind of a bunch of guys behind Garrett Wilson. So I think that Conklin could be a red zone force. And then he doesn't have a ton of upside, but I think in FFPC leagues, he could be fine. Whereas Likely has massive contingent upside. Don't get me wrong there. I think if you're late, I think the contingent upside is massive. The floor is not as good. So, I don't know if I really buy the whole working him into the offense on a week-to-week basis anyways. They kind of talked about that last year and they just didn't really do it. So the floor I think is way, way better for Conklin, and maybe the ceiling's better for Likely.
Nail on the head. I totally prefer Conklin as well. I'm done with the whole, this is going to be a great year for Isaiah Likely. He's going to be a huge part of our offense. Fool me once, shame on you.
Yeah.
Fool me twice, shame on me. Now, in regards to Likely, I think that dependent upon what I have at tight end, if I was drafting in the FFPC, what I have at tight end might actually say, okay, Likely's the better choice here. But if let's say I have one of the studs, right? Andrews, Kincaid, Laporta, any of those guys. I kind of like Conklin as a second guy because I know I can start him and feel pretty good. This guy has gotten 60+ catches the last 3 years with, as you said, I mean, just absolute dreck at quarterback. Now he gets Aaron Rodgers, the first ballot Hall of Famer. And oh, by the way, you got Mike Williams, who they added, who is already hurt. You have a rookie in Malachi Corley. You have, I believe, an undrafted guy in Xavier Gibson, who is contending to be the wide receiver too. And then you got a target monster in Garrett Wilson, and then obviously Breece Hall. I think Conklin is the type of guy. It's weird because I don't think he has the upside that Likely does, but it is contingent upside, buzzword of the show. But that's why, I mean, I think Conklin would make sense for more of my teams than Likely would. If Likely's my third tight end, then yeah, I'm going to go with him instead.
Yeah, way more likely. And I mean, look at that. I worked Likely in there. No, I think that Conklin just, I mean, maybe there is upside. I mean, maybe I'm underrating the potential, the target share potential of, him and Aaron Rodgers connecting, or he scores 10 touchdowns this year. I mean, if he scores 10 touchdowns, he's a flex play in FFPC leagues basically on a week-to-week basis.
Juwan Johnson and Jonnu Smith is our next matchup here in Would You Draft? Who would you rather draft? The ADP on these guys, Juwan Johnson, tight end 26 at the 16:08. I got to check his injury status because I think he recently just came back. Jonnu Smith, tight end 24, now a Miami Dolphin at the 15:10. Which player would you rather draft here between Johnson and Smith?
I think you're picking, a lot of my favorite guys here and putting them against each other on purpose. But
You got to pick what it's like picking your favorite kid, Connor. And that's what I'm forced. This is like 2 hours of Sophie's Choice that we're doing on the show tonight, starring Connor Allen from 4 for 4.
Oh man, I'm gonna go Jonnu. I think that when we look at Jonnu Smith and what they've been saying about him, like tight ends have not really had a big role. It's been a super narrow target tree in Miami. But Mike McDaniel basically said, just because whatever it was doesn't mean that's what it's going to be with the tight end position. He complimented Smith's yak ability. There's been rumors about him getting carries in camp. They're talking about getting him into space, like using him as like another weapon. Like he's like their next, guy. Obviously it's Tyreek. Obviously it's Jalen Waddle. You Devin Achane out of the backfield in some aspects, as well as Raheem Mostert. But like he's going to get his chances with like massive explosive plays. He wasn't playing in certain sets in preseason, which I think is concerning to some people. But because like the upside of this offense is so high, and you're getting him at tight end 25, like I think that the week to week upside is massive here for a guy like Jonnu Smith. That again, you're probably not starting him. Hopefully not week 1. But like if you need to start him, and he could develop into a flex option in FFPC leagues because of the 1.5 PPR. If he's a week to week force there, I would not be surprised. So I think at his current cost, he's a great selection.
Connor and I are going to come up for air after that deep dive of who would you rather draft segment here on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network. When we come back, I want Connor to offer up some specific high stakes fantasy football advice, given that you've drafted in the main event and have that experience behind you. A lot of people are going to be drafting in their first main events for the first time. I want to talk about how you shift your strategy. I want to talk about the rookie veteran ratio, if that exists for you, and so much more, Connor. So let's do that when we come back. You're watching the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show with Eric Balkman and 4 for 4's Connor Allen right here on the Better Sports Network.
Flair once said, if you want to be the man, you got to beat the man. And if you want to be the man or woman this fantasy football season, you got to play over at myffpc.com. That's where all the best fantasy gamers play. That's where all the high stakes gamers play, because they've got the high stakes leagues. They have the best formats. They have the best payouts. It's the place to be. And if you win a FFPC main event or a Fantasy Pros Championship contest over there, you put some serious respect on your name and some money in your pocket. Anyone can win their hometown league, right? You're probably a great fantasy gamer. Prove it. You go out and win an event like this, you can go and put in your Twitter bio or X bio, FFPC main event champion. That means something. That's definitive proof that you're one of the best fantasy gamers in the world. So go over to myffpc.com and use promo code COOP. They'll give you $25 when you deposit $35 or more. And now you're on your road to greatness, right? You could even do an online draft, or you can go and draft in Las Vegas with the stars. Draft at Planet Hollywood for the FFPC main event. That's where they're all doing it. It's awesome stuff. So get set up now so that you can be a star this year. You can be the man. Just like Ric Flair, you can be a champion. Woo!
The Bears have to be one of the most inept franchises of any sport I've ever seen in my entire life. And they share the city with the White Sox, who are also inept. Like, that is how bad the Bears are. I just don't understand how you can go your entire existence and the quarterback that wins you a Super Bowl is Jim McMahon. You couldn't find anybody else.
They don't have a good history with quarterbacks, and they let him be the quarterback for a long time, too.
Deshaun Watson and Patrick Mahomes right there. Mm-hmm. And you drafted Mitch Trubisky. They were right there. There's a lot of pain in being a Falcons fan. The Bears are one of the teams I could argue they might have it worse, and they have a Super Bowl. And when the best quarterback in the past 50 years is Jay Cutler, you have a problem.
That's so funny that you just said that. We were talking about Jay Cutler the other day, me and my friend, and I was like, yeah, he was on, because we were watching the Colorado Rockies game against the Giants, and it looked like he was behind the thing. I was, yeah, well, he played for Denver most of his career. We looked it up. Chicago let him be their starting quarterback way too long.
Here's the thing, too, is that Jay Cutler wasn't bad. Like, he was erratic. He wasn't terrible though.
The poor man's Brett Favre.
I'm taking him over Justin Fields. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I would.
But
yeah.
Jay Cutler led that team to an NFC title game.
Yeah.
That they lost to Green Bay. But he's gotten farther than anybody else. You want to know who the other starting quarterback was for the Bears in the other Super Bowl appearance they made? It was Rex Grossman. What are we doing out here? It was Rex Grossman and Kyle Orton was the backup. How are you that bad? Bro, like, oh my God. Listen to the top 5. According to Football Reference, the top 5 greatest Bears quarterbacks of all time. Jay Cutler, number 1.
I can't believe it.
Sid Luckman, who last played in 1950, is number 2. Jim Harbaugh is number 3. Jim McMahon, the Super Bowl winner, is number 4, and he played there for 6 years. And Mitch Trubisky
no way!
is number 5 on the list as terms of passing yards go.
"19 minutes until the top of the hour. You are watching the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network. I'm Eric Balkman from the FFPC. He is Connor Allen from 4for4 Fantasy Football, 4for4.com, at Connor Allen on the X. Connor and John Paulson from 4for4 just did a main event draft in the FFPC. And I think one of the things that we want to talk about here in this segment is, yeah, I mean, taking the step up to, we always say at the FFPC, taking the step up to the main event or a mid-stakes contest, it's a small step, right, from your home leagues or what have you. But there are some things that you need to do differently when you're competing in the main event to try to win this $1 million grand prize. How did you and John, Connor, shift your draft strategy when you're constructing an FFPC main event team, as opposed to maybe just playing in a single, closed 12-team league at home or with friends or something like that? How did the draft strategy change, or did it change?
Yeah, it did. And I think that I think we ended up focusing more on guys with, that contingent upside that we keep talking about. And that's like just so different in this league compared to your home leagues, because you, like, in a home league, I'll draft wide receivers in the 13th, 14th round that, maybe they're like a flex later in the season, or like guys who I know or have a little higher floor, or, I think a little bit more interested in producing. Whereas FFPC, we took 5 or 6 receivers in our main event, like right off the rip, like first 10, 11 rounds. And we just drafted like 5 running backs who have no clear role in week 1 and are going to score 0 points. But all it takes is, again, in the next 2 weeks, if Breece Hall gets injured or someone gets injured, like, we are so far ahead of, everyone else, because we don't need to start them on a week-to-week basis. That's the biggest difference between best ball, between, like, your home league. Like, you're just shooting for the moon. You need like guys with massive upside so that you can try and win your league, and then win, end up winning some serious money in the final selection there. So Paulson and I not disagreed on it, but like we went back and forth on that multiple times with certain guys, because there's still receivers on the board. Like there was, I think there was Curtis Samuel on the board, and Paulson said, "What are we doing drafting these bunch of goofballs at running back? And there's like, nice receivers on the board." And I was like, well, we're never going to start this guy. I was like, we have 6 other receivers that are all really, really good, but our running backs, we had like Isaiah Pacheco, and then we were stringing together RB2, like Mostert and a couple other guys. Like that RB2 spot was very much up in the air. So I was like, we got to just keep hammering running back, hammering these, contingent upside guys, in hopes all it takes is one. We hit one, and I think we're one of the best teams in the league, like automatically.
Betting props, I think, are interesting in how you can utilize those to your advantage in drafting. I know you're an expert with betting for sure. Can you tell us a little bit about how you use those to your advantage in your main event draft?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting, because I think some people use props as like a signal of like what should be in the ADP market. I almost think that fantasy football drafters are sharper in a lot of ways than betting markets are set. And betting markets are set as like a median outcome, right? And even below that in certain instances, because like if you're setting a season-long prop of like, we'll just say like Caleb Williams prop is like 3,500 passing yards. You know, like if you were to tell me a fantasy football drafter, like he's only threw 3,500 yards, they'd probably be pretty pissed. Like they'd be like, that's kind of a bad season, you know, like, whereas like, I think most, you know, betting, you could bet on Caleb Williams at 4,000 yards at like 3.5 to 1, you know, which is what I think most fantasy football drafters are like, hey, like that's a normal upside outcome for Caleb Williams this year. 4,000 yards isn't really anything. So it's like that kind of difference in mindset that I think understanding that is pretty useful for like with main events and with everything like that. Like I think you can take into account like, oh, like betting props, like ranking them all, you know, together. But some of these guys have different like volatility, different outcomes like that. So I think that's kind of the different mindsets that I use when looking at high stakes drafters like props.
I have to ask you this because I'm contractually obligated when I talk about your main event. One of the biggest differences in drafting in most leagues compared to drafting the FFPC, tight end premium scoring. I have said this over and over again. I've talked to hundreds of high stakes players. I have never gotten one consensus answer. Some people say, yes, you got to get them early. Some people say, I ignore it completely and let all these other guys draft tight ends and I'll just grab whoever later. And then I'll have other people saying, yeah, I just draft them like I would if it was not tight end premium, you know, based, you know, or I just let the draft come to me. And this is sort of, you know, I'll scoop up the value when it's there. How do you handle drafting tight ends in a tight end premium format, especially one where you're trying to win $1 million?
Personally, I like drafting the elite tight ends early if you can get one. You know, I think that the first 2 rounds this year featured like a stacked crew of tight ends. Talking about Sam Laporta, Trey McBride, Travis Kelce, Dalton Kincaid. You know, is like kind of mid to late second rounder in FFPC leagues. I personally like that a lot because when I did a study on this, and you think about like value-based drafting, essentially, like how high, what's the difference between the top ranked tight end and how much do they outscore like the lowest ranked tight end that you can still start? So basically like tight end 1 versus tight end 12 in, you know, a hypothetical scenario. And because of the tight end premium, they perform pretty similarly to wide receivers. So like in terms of the difference between the tight end 1 and tight end 12 versus wide receiver 1, wide receiver 24, I think I put wide receiver 30. So it's like, okay, well, if a top end tight end is as valuable as a top end wide receiver, and we're not getting them, we're getting them in the second round versus like, again, the top wide receivers going CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill, 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's why we see Tyreek Hill go, or Travis Kelce go so high in these leagues historically. But now we're almost getting a discount because no one was necessarily super dominant to the level that we've seen from Travis Kelce was in previous years. But I think that that's in the range of outcomes for a lot of these guys this year. So if you can get one of those 4 or 5 tight ends that I listed in the second round, I think that's like a big part of my strategy this year. To grab one of those, but I think it varies year to year. You know,
I think for me, I can count on one hand how many tight end premium drafts I've ever drafted in. But for me, I always like to get like an elite guy right away. But then I kind of like to double tap it too, Connor, where once 12 or 13 of them have gone and I have like a top 6 guy, I like to get that 14th or 15th guy, you know, usually round 6 or round 7. Makes me feel a little bit more comfy about it, especially if you can, you know, flex out another tight end, or you have dual flex, you know, it gives you that cushion. And I feel like, you know, sometimes when I do that, then it forces the issue a little bit to other people in the draft, and then some running back value or some receiver value. Not always, but sometimes it falls to me. Or if I'm still on the hunt for a quarterback, I'm not like one of these not freak shows. That's I shouldn't say that term. One of these people that like to start off tight end, because I've seen that work. You're not a freak show if you do that. I think you are a freak show if you go tight end in an FFP. I have not seen that work ever.
I've seen that. So I think I saw that in Vegas last year.
I mean, I've seen people do it. I've never seen it work. Where like,
I never have either. I've never seen it work. Hypothetically, it could work. You know, again, like they always talk about the race to fill your flex and all that. Maybe, I mean, a tight end premium is the only spot that it can work, I think, but it's not something that I've successfully implemented with a 3 tight end. I've done the 2 tight ends and it's been fine. But if you don't hit your running back or wide receivers, like if you miss at all with like your depth picks, you're in a pretty sweaty situation to figure out the rest of your team there. So I guess it depends. If you feel good about the values, which this year I think there are good values at wide receiver and running back, then I don't know. I mean, maybe I'll give it a whirlwind draft. Who knows?
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, like I've seen people do it in our pros versus Joes. Craig Campbell, who I'm actually going to see this weekend, I'll be drafting with him in Kentucky for a bunch of leagues. He did it in pros versus Joes one year just to say, To hell with it. Let's see what happens here. Crack Rock on the
Oh
X,
yeah.
who is a noted FFPC drafter. I've seen him crank purple early and often before. Again, have not seen it work out, but man, I'd love to see it work out someday, because that would cause chaos in drafts next year with a lot of triple tight end starts. It'd be a lot of fun.
Oh, yeah.
Let's talk about rookie to veteran ratio in FFPC main events. Does that even exist for you? Is that something that you concern yourself with? Having enough proven guys, but also having enough, high upside mystery box type rookies where we don't know what to expect from them. I've heard people talk about it. I never really focus on it too much. I feel like it usually takes care of itself. I don't think I've ever drafted a team without a rookie. I usually draft a couple of rookies at least on a lot of teams. How do you handle that? Is that something that you ever concern yourself with?
I think it just goes hand in hand with like the upside versus floor of like how you're building out your lineup, right? So like, I mean, if you're in the 6th, 7th, 8th round and you're looking at guys like Xavier Worthy versus like Calvin Ridley, and like think like those scenarios, like I think it depends on what you have. And if you can't plan to keep on adding a wide receiver, like can you afford to draft a Xavier Worthy if he needs to be your starting wide receiver in week 1? Maybe not, like that's probably not something you want to do. But like in our main event with Paulson, he was like our 6th wide receiver. We took him in like round 8, like in that case, like that's like the perfect instance where like, all right, we have Keenan Allen, we have Tank Dell, we have Justin Jefferson and Marvin Harrison Jr. Xavier Worthy is a great target to add, when we have Patrick Mahomes or something like that. Like that's kind of the ratio of like, it's not something I'm like, oh, I have X, veterans and now I need more rookies. It's just like a natural thing of like, all right, I have some guys I'm ready to start. Now I just want upside. And rookies generally provide more volatility,
right,
in my opinion, than veterans.
The balancing upside and floor, I think, is another thing that kind of goes hand in hand with what we talked about. How much different, and I know you talked about with the way that you guys hit running backs at the end of your draft. How much does chasing upside change in a format like this, where you're trying to be, quite frankly, you're trying to be as volatile as possible in the second half of your draft to try to make your team unique and make your team explosive enough to take down $1 million in a 3-week sprint? How much more are you chasing upside in this format rather than, just say a closed 12-team league?
Yeah, way more. And I think that it's like different kinds of upside, right? So when you're drafting like a best ball team, right? Like you want like week to week upside that's not necessarily predictable. You want like the Gabe Davises, the Rashid Shaheeds, the guy who's are going to pop off like randomly when maybe you weren't expecting it. Whereas like in this type of league, I want, late round rookies who can be weekly starters, like Brian Thomas Jr. Maybe he's volatile, maybe he's not, maybe he's Calvin Ridley, but we might not see it for 6 weeks. But when he hits, he's going to be a great starter. I think the same thing happened with Jalen Waddle a couple years ago. It happens every year with rookies. Like certain guys are not volatile. Sometimes are, you want them as like a weekly starter, like a guy that you can actually throw in there and you're not just like, oh, well, it might be 2 points, it might be 20, but probably 2. Like I want the guy who's going to come in, score 15, 20 and still has that upside. So that's just like the archetype of player, I would say, that can develop in like a weekly option instead of just like the more volatile high ADOT types of guys. But in general, like, yeah, it's like way more volatility, the most, all the way levered up, just need everything we can, in terms of like volatility wise to hopefully win the last few weeks.
Do you feel like you are chasing upside at one position more so than other positions at all?
Well, this year it's like a lot of like, I would say RB2, just the way my drafts are shaking out. It's always been like 1-ish running back in the first couple rounds. And then I'm just like hammering running back from rounds like 7 to like, again, 15, like half of them are usually running backs. So, yeah, I would say in that scenario, definitely wide receiver this year, I just think is so deep with like, where we're at. Like, it's just you keep drafting them. All of them have week to week upside in the first like 6, 7 rounds anyway. So, I don't know if it's as much upside there and for the wide receiver position as compared to running back this year for me.
Yeah, and I think that's true of like I've always viewed it as I know people that say, oh, you can always find wide receiver late. And I'm like, well, I don't know. Number one, I don't know about always. And number two, I don't know what kind of receivers you're usually finding late that you can then plug into your lineup unless it's like, a true handcuff situation with like, if Mike Evans or Chris Godwin goes down, then yeah, Jalen McMillan, you could probably start him or Trey Palmer, whoever it is. But running backs, I mean, these guys, they get used up so fast in the NFL that emphasis on used, because if somebody goes down, the opportunity that these guys get is huge, and they're the majority of them, if you get the right one, can be used in the passing game. He's out there pass blocking on third down. He's banging between the tackles. He's being used in space. So, and that's what I always say about, you got to get the right backup running back. Just because somebody's second on the depth chart doesn't make him a good choice. I mean, it doesn't. Just because of that doesn't make him a good choice. There's
Right.
got to be other factors that go into it. And I think that leads me into my next question here. When you draft your running back early on, as you said you've been doing this year, and try to figure out RB2 later, which is something I've done for years. Hasn't worked out for me, but maybe I'm just not looking in the right spot for the second running back. I shouldn't say it's never worked out. It has worked out sometimes. But when you talk about backup running backs in the FFPC main event, what's the correct approach? Do you like to back up your guy that you got in the first round? Do you like to grab other people's backup running backs? Like, and again, increase volatility, increase variability on your roster. How do you handle that? I know, like, for me, in years past, I was always upset when somebody sniped me on my backup running back in round 14 or 15 or whatever. Now I really don't care as much, Connor.
Yeah, I think, again, for this kind of contest, like, if you think about the ideal scenario, you draft Christian McCaffrey, you draft Braylon Allen, you draft Ray Davis, and then James Cook gets injured, and then Breece Hall gets injured, and you have, those three. Like, that's in your best case scenario for your team, hypothetically, that you drafted. If you drafted Jordan Mason, like that, you're, eliminating risk, right? But you're not gaining anything. Like, you're just like, you've treaded water, essentially, hopefully. Like, I mean, again, like, there's no way that he's going to score Christian McCaffrey levels, but like, you're basically just got like an RB2, maybe RB1, like low end RB1. It's like, in my opinion, I traditionally try and take other people's handcuffs with contingent upside, because, again, it's like Braylon Allen's of the world, the Ray Davis of the world. Like, I think those guys have way more upside for my team specifically. And then that's why I kind of like to mix the floor guys with like the ceiling guys, which is usually, again, like 0 week-to-week value. You can't. Braylon Allen is unstartable week 1. Like, you can't play him. But again, by week 5 or 6, if something happens, or even if Braylon Allen or Breece Hall misses a couple games here and there, like, you have a couple good starts, like RB2 worthy starts for sure. So That's kind of my general strategy for handcuffing.
And that's kind of what I've done. Like, I'm all about, if somebody else snakes mine, fine. But if I can get a couple others, and now all of a sudden, instead of 3 running backs, I have 5 running backs, or even just 4 running backs to choose from, especially in the FFPC too, where you can start 4 running backs. I mean, think about that start that, like, similar to what you guys did, right? You have all these receivers, you and John Paulson have all these receivers. I mean, as awesome as that is, what happens if you hit on 2 of these backup running backs and it doesn't have to be for the rest of the season. It could just be for a couple of weeks. Now, all of a sudden, you're I don't want to say you're covered for bye weeks or you're covered for injuries, but that's a good problem to have that depth there. And I think that's why you do it. Okay. The deepest position this season in drafts, is it wide receiver? We talked about how deep that position is this year. And does that change from year to year, or is it kind of always wide receiver, Connor?
Yeah, I think that there's like varying levels. I think running back is like very interesting, because it's like there's an elite tier, which is like basically just Christian McCaffrey, maybe Bijan Robinson, maybe Breece Hall, and then there's like this group of like bunch of different guys with anywhere from like Jonathan Taylor, Jahmyr Gibbs to like I would even include Isaiah Pacheco at this point, Devin Achane, kind of that range, and then there's just like 30 guys, 40 guys in my mind where it's like I don't know, maybe 20 guys that are like, they could have upside. They're kind of RB2s. Like, maybe they're not. We don't know. So like, in that sense, I think running back is fairly deep, but wide receivers, I mean, in FFPC leagues, again, you're getting good guys. I mean, I'm at the 6-7 turn right now, and there's still like Calvin Ridley, is still available on the clock at the 6-7 turn. And I think he's going to be, again, like a low end wide receiver 2 this season, probably in PPR leagues, maybe high end wide receiver 3. So I think, from a starting perspective, I think that it's probably deeper at wide receiver, but you can make the case for running back this year, I think, is deeper than ever, or maybe just ADPs have shifted so that like wide receivers being pushed up, running backs in that tier kind of being pushed down a little bit.
Connor Allen at Connor Allen NFL on the X. Check him out at 4for4football.com. And of course, listen to the Move the Line podcast, where you can get anywhere you get podcasts, 4for4 bets as well. Connor, is there anything else that we should promote?
No, I mean, we have rankings, we have articles. I'm writing about the FFPC a bunch, and then release all my player props, all my bets and everything. So.
Sean Engel, thank you so much for producing. Connor Allen, great job tonight. Thank you so much. MyFFPC.com is where to go. Matt Schell from Draft Sharks joins me next week at 7 o'clock. It's going to be a fun show. MyFFPC.com and, of course, 4for4.com for the best fantasy analysis. Good luck, Connor, in winning that $1 million. For Sean Engel and Connor Allen, I'm Eric Balkman. Talk to you next week, everybody.